Chapter 1006. Bang! The attack carried a terrifying force and directly exploded on the chest of Versilia's magic mecha armor, causing a heart-wrenching sound and a shockwave. Bang! Under the direct impact of the terrifying power, the chest armor of the Crimson Giant, which was covered in a thick composite mech, was blasted apart, turning into fragments that scattered on the ground. Versilia only felt a powerful shockwave that shook her body. Then, she completely lost her ability to resist. Like a rubber ball that was kicked away, she flew backward along with the heavy armor and crashed to the ground with a sharp gust of wind. Thick sand and dust rose from the center of the heavy mecha armor like smoke. The ground that was directly hit by the crimson mecha armor cracked inch by inch and scraped out a layer of soil. Cough cough. Lying on the ground, Versilia violently coughed a few times and tightly clenched her teeth. Damn, because the breastplate of the elf magic mech had been destroyed by Noah's kick, Versilia who was lying inside the mech was also revealed. Versilia didn't care about this at all. She endured the severe pain and raised her head with difficulty. In front of Versilia's eyes, Noah who was holding the demon slayer slowly walked towards Versilia with powerful steps. Because the divine power surging around Noah was too dense, it was like a layer of phosphorescent light film that covered Noah's body. As for the demon slayer in Noah's hand, it was still emitting a dazzling light due to the fact that it had been infused with a sufficient amount of divine power. At this time, Versilia felt a suffocating pressure from the man in front of her. This kind of suffocating pressure, Versilia had only felt it from two people so far. One was called the strongest sword dancer by the world, Lotus. The other was called the strongest elf user by the world, Grey Vaz. Noah was the third person. This also proved that Noah was an existence that could be compared to the first two. In fact, it might even be above that. Versilia could feel the terrifying pressure emanating from Noah's body. Recalling that Noah had used the same ultimate sword technique as Lotus, she felt a dark emotion welling up in her heart. Could it be that she was defeated by that sword dance again without any power to fight back? No. No, Versilia used her terrifying willpower to support her body. She controlled the broken mecha and stood up shakily. I have become stronger. Compared to 3 years ago, Versilia had indeed become stronger. And a lot stronger. After all, 3 years ago, Versilia was defeated by Lotus's ultimate sword technique in one strike. Today, although Noah did not take long to defeat Versilia, and the whole process did not take more than 5 strikes, it was still much better than being defeated in one strike. However, Versilia remembered it clearly. At the beginning, if Noah had not deliberately held back, then, with the initial form of the ultimate sword technique called Purple Lightning, Versilia might have been defeated by the same strike, at the same moment, under the same circumstances. How could Versilia let go of this? In order to defeat Lotus, I sacrificed so much. Versilia stared at Noah. How can I lose before I even meet Renasubal? 3 years ago, the battle with Lotus completely changed Versilia's life. Until that day, Versilia had always boasted of being the strongest knight and was full of confidence in herself. That was to be expected. As a descendant of a lower noble family that declined after the Lombard War, Versilia not only relied on her excellent elven trainer to tame the sealed spirits that normal elven trainers could not touch, but she was also adopted by the military rulers of the Kingdom of Osea, the Duke of Frangelto's family. At the age of 15, she stepped onto the stage of the Elven Sword Dance Festival and obtained the qualifications to be one of the 12 knights. In the entire kingdom, how many people could achieve such a result? They could probably be counted on one hand, right? Thus, Versilia carried this confidence and stepped onto the stage of the Elven Sword Dance Festival, vowing to become the champion of the festival. However, this confidence was crushed in the first match of the Elven Sword Dance Festival. Lotus was not only younger than Versilia at that time, she was also a newcomer with no reputation. In the end, Facing such an opponent, Versilia still lost even after using all her strength. At that time, Versilia still had not buried her obsession with Lotus. Because compared to the spectators who were captivated by Lotus's beautiful sword dance, Versilia, who was in close contact with Lotus's sword dance, felt a stronger sense of longing and respect for her than the average person. In other words, like Claire, Linley, and Alice, Versilia was also captivated by Lotus' sword dance. However, with such longing and respect, Versilia saw the eyes of the strongest sword dancer girl. In the girl's deep eyes, there was no enmity towards Versilia, nor was there any pity for her. There was no trace of disdain for this weak opponent. Instead, there was no feeling at all. In the eyes of the strongest sword dancer, Versilia did not exist at all. From that moment on, Versilia was captivated by her obsession. She had to make the strongest sword dancer acknowledge her. For this, she would do anything. Even if it was the power of something dirty in the past, it was the same. Can't lose. Versilia controlled the wobbly mecha giant and stumbled in front of Noah. She struggled to reach out her armored arm and grabbed Noah's collar. Only you, who possess a sword dance that even moves my heart, can absolutely not lose. Noah did not resist and let Versilia grab his collar. He looked at Versilia with pity in his eyes. It's time for you to wake up. Noah reached out and tightly grabbed the armored arm that was grabbing his collar. He slowly pried it away, but his eyes did not leave Versilia's pale face. Because of your obsession, you pursue power, but because of your obsession, you neglect everything else and become a captive of power. What is the meaning of your life like this? You're saying that this is meaningless. Versilia glared at Noah. What do you understand? What do you know? That's right. I don't understand what you're thinking. Noah glanced at Versilia. But I know that if you just want Liana Subble to acknowledge you, then you can't do it now. You. Versilia's pretty face twisted in agitation. At this moment, Versilia's face froze. Go. Without any warning, Versilia suddenly grabbed her heart and laid on the ground. Her face was filled with extreme pain. The sudden pain caused Versilia's tattered elven magic armor to explode and disappear into the air. The divine might around her went berserk and began to become chaotic. Ugh! Ah! Not long after, Versilia clutched her heart and screamed in pain. Seeing this, Noah frowned. What's wrong with you? Ignoring Noah, Versilia endured the pain, propped herself up, and rushed into the bushes. Noah's frown deepened. Just as he was about to chase after her, chaotic footsteps sounded in the distance. Noah! Claire, Linley, and Alice brought many people and rushed in the direction of Noah. Noah could only look in the direction where Versilia disappeared. His eyes began to show some thoughts. Chapter 1007. In Alicia Elven Academy, students were prohibited from fighting among themselves. Whether it was Noah or Versilia, they were the most famous people in Alicia Elven Academy. Therefore, the conflict between Noah and Versilia, and the fact that they started a fight in the academy, caused a huge uproar in no time and spread throughout the entire academy. As the dean, Gray and Vath were the first to receive the news. Originally, as long as the Wind King Knight set out, they would be able to solve this kind of private fight immediately. However, this time, the two parties involved in the fight were not people that the Zephyr Knights could stop. Therefore, as expected, Noah was called to the office by Gray and Vath almost immediately. What's going on? Gray and Vath crossed her arms in front of her chest and stared at Noah, who was standing in front of the desk. Although there was no dissatisfaction in her tone, it was full of doubts. Why did you suddenly start a fight with Versilia in the academy? Gray and Vath believed that she had a good eye for people. Gray and Vath could see that although Noah could not be said to be a well-behaved person, if no one provoked him, he would not do anything that gave others a headache. Otherwise, with Noah's strength, the Alicia Elven Academy would have been turned upside down by him. Basically, as long as nothing happened, Noah would never take the initiative to cause trouble. Therefore, even Gray and Vath were very surprised by Noah's sudden conflict with Versilia. In this regard, Noah just shook his head. Don't look at me. Although I want to accompany you to the end, the main problem is still with Versilia. As for the reason, you should be able to guess it, right? You're trying to shirk all responsibility, aren't you? Gravath pushed up the small glasses on her face and said. It's Liena Subble, right? Noah nodded, which made Gray and Vath sigh. As expected, Versilia has her eyes on you. Gray and Vath naturally knew about Versilia's obsession with Lien. When they received the news that Versilia had rushed back to the academy overnight because of Lien, Gray and Vath had already expected it. Noah's relationship with Lien would definitely make Versilia target Noah. Today's conflict was actually within Gray and Vath's expectations. However, Gray and Vath did not expect this conflict to come so quickly. Of course, as Noah said, although most of the reasons for his conflict with Versilia were because of Versilia, it was also because Noah was willing to accompany him to the end. Otherwise, Noah would not have openly provoked Versilia in the Wind King Nights. Let me make it clear first. The commotion caused by you and Versilia is enough for the Academy to punish you, Gray and Vath said with some displeasure. If I didn't step in to suppress it, you and Versilia's ranking points might have been deducted. Noah shrugged with a do whatever you want look, which made Gray and Vath even more displeased. Forget it. Both you and Versilia will be the trump cards of the Osea Empire in the Elven Sword Dance Festival. Everyone will choose to turn a blind eye to your personal conflict. Gray and Vath glanced at Noah. However, before the Elven Sword Dance Festival starts, it's best not to cause any more trouble. The Academy is already chaotic enough. What's wrong? Noah sharply sensed that something was wrong from Gray and Vath's words. Did something else happen in the Academy? To be precise, something happened in the Academy City. Gray and Vath snorted. Recently, some shady rats seem to have snuck into the Academy City. You should understand if they say it's the Skeleton Alliance. Hearing Gray and Vath's words, Noah's mind couldn't help but become active. The Skeleton Alliance. Noah had only heard this term from Lotus recently. The Skeleton Alliance was originally an underground organization that specialized in doing shady business. Now that the Elven Sword Dance Festival was about to start, this underground organization would definitely take this opportunity to contact many elves who wanted to participate in the festival but were unable to do so. For example, they would induce the elves who wanted to participate in the Elven Sword Dance Festival to undergo the transplanting of spells and engravings. Sneaking into the Academy City of the Alicia Elven Academy was probably for this purpose. However, Lotus had also said that Versilia had contacted the Skeleton Alliance before. When Versilia rushed back to the Academy, the Skeleton Alliance had snuck into the Academy City again. Was there a connection between the two? After coming out of the Dean's office, Noah went directly to the Crow class dormitory and returned to Linslay's room. As soon as he opened the door, Noah saw Claire and Linsley. Even Lotus was there. Claire and Linsley stood up at the same time and looked at Noah. How is it? Claire asked anxiously. The Dean doesn't plan to punish you, right? Although strictly speaking, it was that fortress girl who attacked you first and you could only be considered self-defense. There are many higher-ups in the Academy who have expectations for Versilia. Linsley raised her beautiful eyebrows. If I don't handle this well, my team's ranking might be lowered and even disqualified from the Elven Sword Dance Festival, right? It's not as serious as you think. Noah couldn't help but laugh. Gray and Vath also want to see me appear in the Elven Sword Dance Festival. They won't let me be disqualified. After saying this, Noah looked around and then looked at Claire. Where's Alice? She's in the Night Corps, Claire said. Alice is dealing with such a big matter in the night core. Then what about Fayanna? Noah looked at Lotus and asked in confusion. Didn't you take Fayanna away? I'll have Lustia accompany her. Lotus gave a concise explanation. There are some problems with the princess contract. After saying this, Lotus didn't explain further. However, Noah, Claire, and Lindsley all understood what Lotus meant. Perhaps the princess contract was the root cause of Fayanna becoming a lost elven concubine. Lotus seemed to have known about this long ago, so she wanted to help Fayanna. I heard you had a conflict with Versilia Eva. Lotus looked straight at Noah and asked. What? Did you find anything? Although there were all kinds of effects of incantations, they were still artificial spells that affected elves. If Versilia really did transplant the incantations, then they might be able to find something during battle. With this goal in mind, coupled with Versilia's arrogance, Noah deliberately stood out to provoke and test Versilia. Versilia is indeed a bit strange. Noah touched his chin and said. Although it's a bit strange for me to say this, Versilia's divine might seems to be a bit abnormal. Generally speaking, the higher the level and power of the elven device, the more divine might it would consume when using it. Versilia's elves were sealed elves, and the power of the elven device was even greater. After a round of bombardment, even the strongest building wouldn't be able to withstand 2 to 3 seconds of bombardment. With such a powerful elven device, just using it would consume a lot of divine might. From Noah's point of view, ordinary elves would have to lie down after using Versilia's elven device for less than 30 seconds. However, Versilia continued to use the elven magic device without restraint. Even during the battle, the divine aura didn't show any signs of depletion. For an elven user, this was indeed a bit abnormal. I don't know how much Versilia's god's aura is left, but during the fight with me, Versilia's god's aura was at its peak. There was no sign of it being drained. Noah recalled Versilia's abnormal behavior. Also, in the end, something seemed to have happened to Versilia's body. She seemed to be in great pain. Pain. Lotus's brows furrowed. Chapter 1008. The two suspicious points that Noah had discovered might prove that Versilia had transplanted the rune seal into her body. After all, just like what Noah said, it was impossible for Versilia's divine aura to not consume a large amount of energy while using the elven equipment of that level. Under such circumstances, not only did Versilia use the elven device without restraint, but her divine aura was also at its peak. That was a little abnormal. Not everyone could be like Noah, who had an energy source that could store unlimited amounts of energy. However, if Versilia had implanted a rune that could greatly amplify the effects of divine might, then this matter would become possible. Of course, this couldn't directly prove that Versilia had transplanted the rune. But as a point of suspicion, it was enough. Secondly, the abnormality of Versilia's body that Noah mentioned at the end was also a little suspicious. One had to know that transplanting the rune wasn't without a price. This thing was similar to Aster, which could be said to be exchanging one's life in exchange for great power. During the Lambard War, the existence of the rune had caused countless elves to die from the horrifying side effects. It was very inhumane. If Versilia had really transplanted the rune, then bearing the side effects of the rune would naturally cause abnormalities in her body. These 2 points were enough to prove that Versilia was the one who had transplanted the incantation into her body. In addition, Versilia had been in contact with the people of the Skeleton Alliance before. No one would believe that Versilia had transplanted the spell seal on herself. Lotus lowered her head, the light in her eyes flickering. After a while, she raised her head and looked at Noah. In other words, you also think that Versilia might have transplanted the rune? At most, it is only a possibility, Noah said straightforwardly. My position is only to assist you. Now, I have told you my judgment. It is up to you to decide how to deal with Versilia's matter. Lien nodded nonchalantly and turned around to look out the window. Sensing that Lotus' mood had been affected, Claire and Linley both chose to remain silent, giving Lotus precious quiet time. Looking at Lotus with her back facing him, Noah nodded in his heart. This girl's life had changed because of the world fragment. Not only did she inherit the power of the Dark Elf King that she shouldn't have inherited, she was also raised as an assassination tool by the Academy when she was young. Noah had heard of it before. When the Institute of Education nurtured assassins, the first thing they did was to erase the assassins' will and emotions, annihilate their humanity, and turn them into mere tools. After coming out from such a place, not only did Lotus not lose her humanity, but she even wanted to settle things with Versilia for her past mistakes. This was enough to prove that Lotus had a good heart. However, if Versilia really transplanted the incantation because of Lotus, then Noah really couldn't intervene. No, it should be said that he couldn't interfere. This was something that was destined to be solved by Lotus herself. All Noah could do was to help. Help this girl whose life and fate had been changed by the world fragment, and who had a faint relationship with him. It had been about 20 days since he came to this world. In another 10 days or so, Noah's authority would also be released. Although there was no opponent that required Noah to use his authority to deal with, it was still better to be able to use all of his power. Not long after, the curtain of night quietly fell. During the day, the elven forest was filled with a holy and lively aura. But at night, the elven forest would become a gloomy ghost land, with vile elves everywhere. It was very dangerous. But at this time, Versilia was running in the elven forest that was shrouded in darkness. Ha! Goo! One of his hands clutched his heart tightly, as if he was trying to pull it out of his chest, and he kept exerting force. As Versilia staggered forward, her expression was distorted by the intense pain from her heart. If someone could hear Versilia's heartbeat, they would be surprised to find that Versilia's heartbeat was abnormally fast. Her heart was beating wildly. It was this beating heart that brought indescribable pain to Versilia. Goo! Ugh! Versilia wanted to suppress the pain, but she was tormented by the pain and could only groan in pain. Versilia originally thought that she had already gotten used to this heart. But now, it seemed that Versilia wasn't completely used to this heart. It was just that the heart had been hiding for a long time, as if it was looking for a moment of exhaustion. Now, after being defeated by Noah, Versilia, whose body and mind had suffered a blow, welcomed the eruption of the hidden danger in her body. An uncontrollable pain and impulse surged in her body. It was a pitch-black impulse that wanted to lead Versilia's soul to depravity. This impulse made Versilia want to destroy everything in front of her, but she forcefully suppressed it with her last bit of willpower. I can't. Versilia suppressed the dark emotions in her heart and the impulse to destroy everything. Her face was pale as she clenched her teeth and persevered. I can't lose here. With the last shred of determination, Versilia moved forward again, trying her best to move forward. Her vision was blurry due to the intense pain. Her body and mind were under an unimaginable burden. However, Versilia still squeezed out the last bit of her will and staggered forward. Until a flirtatious laughter came from Versilia's surroundings. Seems like you're almost at your limit. Hearing this voice, Versilia stopped in her tracks and looked at the bushes beside her. Finally willing to show yourself. After hearing Versilia's words, the seductive voice came again. What? Are you looking for me? In the bushes, a figure quietly appeared. It was a woman with long, wavy emerald hair and a tall, slim figure. She looked extremely seductive. The woman was around 20 to 30 years old. Her ears were pointy, just like the elves that Noah saw in the world of looking for a chance encounter in the dungeon. Of course, the woman was not an elf in the world of looking for a chance encounter in the dungeon. However, she had a close relationship with the elves in this world. It was said that in the ancient mythological era, there was a demi-human race that came from the elemental realm to the human world. Their unique feature was their long pointy ears. This demi-human race was called the Elfie race. The woman was from the Elfie race. Other than that, the woman had another identity. Vivian Melosa. Versilia endured the intense pain in her heart and stared at the Elfie race named Vivian. Cunning merchant of the Skeleton Alliance, you really came to Elven Academy. Vivian Melosa was a merchant of the Skeleton Alliance that specialized in selling spell engravings. However, being a merchant was at most Vivian's side job. Vivian's real job was to study spell engravings. In the past, not only did she work as a lecturer in the Imperial Research Institute of the Austrian Empire, she was also a pioneer in spell engravings. Due to the end of the Lambar War, spell engravings were banned and Vivian was chased out of the research institute. After that, she wandered around various organizations and continued to study spell engravings without sleep or rest. In the end, she joined the Skeleton Alliance. To Vivian, who specialized in researching runes, Olathe Elven Academy, a place where the best magi of the Empire gathered, was undoubtedly the best laboratory. Here, not only could Vivian easily find those witch priests who thirsted for power and came from prestigious families, she could sell their spell armor engravings and obtain research funds. She could also observe the elves who had transplanted their spell armor engravings to obtain research materials and continue to improve her own creations. Versilia was one of Vivian's customers. At the same time, she was Vivian's guinea pig. Chapter 1009. In the Dark Elf Forest, a merchant from the Skeleton Alliance carefully observed Versilia. Versilia was holding onto the trunk of a tree with one hand and clutching her heart with the other. Her face was pale, and her body was covered in sweat. Versilia looked very weak. She didn't even try to hide her pity. You really have reached your limit. I thought you would be able to get used to the rune engraving in the heart. What a pity. Although the rune engraving had powerful side effects, if the recipient was very adaptable to the rune engraving, then the side effects would be minimized. In the past, some of the elves who received the rune engraving in the Lambard War died within 1 or 2 hours after the engraving. Some survived for several years until the end of the Lambard War. The rune engraving in the heart was the most powerful and most dangerous rune engraving. Once the engraving was successful, the recipient's power would receive an astonishing boost. The boost would be much greater than other engraving recipients. Take Versilia for example. The effect of the rune engraving in her heart was that it could provide Versilia with endless divine might energy. It was because of this that Versilia could use her elven rune engraving without restraint. It was like a truly limitless fortress, displaying terrifying destructive power. Of course, Versilia's divine might energy wasn't truly limitless. Unlike Noah who could store energy without any limit, Versilia's divine might energy could only be maintained at its peak state. After that, it could no longer receive more divine might energy. For example, if Versilia's divine aura was 100, then the 100 points of divine aura would be buffed by the spell engraving and maintained at 100 points. As for Noah, if his divine might energy was expressed as a value, then who knew how many zeros would be added to it? Moreover, it would continue to increase. However, even if it couldn't compare to Noah, the effect of Versilia's rune engraving was still very shocking. This was the powerful effect of the rune engraving in the heart. But at the same time, the side effects of the rune engraving in the heart were also frighteningly high. At least, apart from one person, Vivian had never seen an elf with a rune engraving in their heart live for long. Now, it seemed that Versilia had almost reached her limit after being defeated by Noah. Shut up. Versilia was still resisting the pain from her heart. Even though her face was pale, her eyes were still frighteningly cold. Skeleton Alliance merchant, I need more power. You should be able to give it to me, right? What did you say? Vivian's eyes widened slightly. You mean, I need rune engraving, more runes? Versilia's stubborn voice. Versilia. Hearing this, the flirtatious smile on Vivian's face slowly disappeared and turned into disbelief. Versilia, a single rune engraving in her heart was already pushing Versilia to her limit. If more runes were engraved in her body, the terrifying side effects would definitely make Versilia die in pain and despair. Versilia was naturally aware of this. However, Versilia couldn't care less about that. You just have to do as I say. Versilia clutched her heart with shocking strength. Even though her face was filled with pain, her eyes were still filled with terrifying stubbornness and unwillingness. I can't win against that man. Then I can't win against that sword dancer. I don't want to be defeated by that sword dance without being able to retaliate. But this level of power isn't enough. It's not enough. At this moment, Versilia seemed to be emitting pitch-black emotions all over her body as she uttered words of darkness. I will have the power to defeat Noah Duria, he said. I need the power to defeat Renasubal. I must defeat them. Seeing Versilia's unwillingness and stubbornness, Versilia spoke out in pity. But, one rune engraving is already pushing you to your limit. Even one more rune engraving will make you die instantly. I won't die. Versilia said in a tone that was unclear whether she was in a delirious state or determined state of mind. Before I defeat those two, I won't die. Hearing this, Versilia endured the pain. Her eyes were filled with unwillingness and stubbornness. After a while, Versilia smiled. Forget it. You're already at your limit. If I continue to observe you like this, I won't get any better data. I'll do as you wish. But, you should know that the cost of engraving a rune engraving isn't cheap at all. Just as Versilia finished speaking, a small object was thrown to Versilia. Versilia was startled and subconsciously caught it. Versilia opened her hand and looked at the object in her hand. She was shocked. Lying in Versilia's hand was a magatama that looked like a deep red gemstone. This is... Versilia exclaimed in surprise. The blood of the Elven King. Sealed in it is the power of the Elven King who can control a large number of elves, Versilia said coldly. Although I took it from an insignificant person, the blood of the Elven King is undoubtedly a national treasure. This thing should be worth enough, right? Hee hee. Vivian chuckled in delight. I didn't expect that you would actually have the blood of the Elf King. This is a national treasure that even the majority of the royal family is unable to obtain. If I were to sell it, I would be able to obtain a sufficient amount of research funds to squander. In other words, Versilia agreed to Versilia's deal. Versilia snorted coldly and turned her head away. She looked in the direction of the Elven Academy. It was as if she could see the figure of the only male elven user who once swung the sword that moved her heart. The hand that clutched her heart tightened. I will definitely defeat you. The next day, Noah and Linley had just gotten out of bed when someone knocked on the door. It was Alice who knocked on the door. Alice had a worried look on her face. As soon as she entered the room, Alice brought a piece of news. Versilia didn't come back last night. Linley asked in surprise. Why? I don't know. Alice's face was full of worry. The dean wanted to warn Sister Versilia about the conflict yesterday, but since yesterday, no one has been able to find Sister Versilia. Only a few students said that they vaguely saw Sister Versilia leave the academy and enter the Elven Forest. After that, there was no news of Sister Versilia. Could it be that the fortress girl took things too hard? Linley looked at Noah with uncertainty. Even you don't know where the fortress girl went. How would I know where Versilia went? Noah shrugged. My mission was only to confirm if Versilia had the inscription of the transplanting spell. I'm not her nanny. That's what the strongest sword dancer should do. Otherwise, I wouldn't have watched her leave yesterday. But I don't know where Sister Versilia went, Alice said worriedly. You said it yesterday. Sister Versilia's body seems to be abnormal. If she encounters any more danger, hearing Alice's words, Noah sighed inwardly. To be honest, Versilia's relationship with Noah was not only bad, but also very bad. If it wasn't for Lotus's request, Noah wouldn't even care about Versilia. However, Versilia was Alice's adopted sister. Noah didn't care about Versilia, but it didn't mean that Alice didn't care about Versilia. Just as Noah was about to say something to Alice, an accident happened. Kaboom! A shocking explosion shook the dormitory and entered the ears of Noah and the others. Noah and the others were shocked. Chapter 10:10. Rumble. The sound of the explosion was like a wave of sound that swept through the entire space and resounded throughout the sky of the Elven Academy. Noah, Alice, and Linley rushed out of the Crow dormitory and arrived at the courtyard in front of the dormitory. They raised their eyes and looked in the direction of the sound. Far in the distance, in a corner of the elven forest that surrounded the academy, a thick cloud of fire and dust rose into the sky like a mushroom cloud. There, the forest had long been covered in flames, and the fire was gradually spreading to the surroundings, gradually expanding the intensity of the fire. Fire! Alice said in shock. How could the elven forest be on fire? The elven forest was where the elves from the elemental elves lived. That forest was a rare and comfortable place for the elves in the human world. Therefore, even the fire elves would restrain themselves and not let the elven forest catch fire. In addition, there were many water elves in the elven forest. With those elves there, the elven forest couldn't possibly catch fire. At least, neither Alice nor Linley had ever seen the elven forest on fire. Unless someone deliberately set it on fire. What's going on? Look! The elven forest is on fire. The elven forest is on fire. How can this be? The students living in the dormitory of the Crow class seemed to be alarmed as well. They either poked their heads out of the windows of their rooms or, like Noah and the others, came out of the door. When they saw the elven forest on fire, they all began to clamor loudly. Claire was also one of the people who came out of the dormitory. What's going on? Claire didn't even have time to tie up her hair, letting it hang behind her back as she rushed out of the dormitory. When she saw the fire in the elven forest in the distance, she also stood up in shock. Why is the elven forest on fire? Who knows? Linley didn't forget to cause trouble for Claire even at this time. Don't tell me it's because you set it on fire. Who started a fire randomly? Claire glared at Linley angrily. Besides, I'm right here. Why would I set it on fire? Maybe your fire cat ran into the elven forest. Of course not. Scarlet was a good boy. Do you think I'm as unruly as your big dog? Fenrir is a proud white wolf. Not a dog. Furthermore, he had a very good upbringing. Unlike you, an unruly stray cat. What did you say? All right. Stop arguing. Alice yelled in annoyance. Why are you still arguing at a time like this? Noah didn't care about the noise that lingered in his ears. He gazed in the direction of the elven forest and spoke in a deep voice. This is bad. Claire, Linley, and Alice all heard Noah's voice, and their hearts immediately skipped a beat. Have you forgotten? Noah looked at Claire, Linley, and Alice. Ren and Fayanna are both in the elf forest. Claire, Linley, and Alice finally remembered this matter, and immediately stood up in shock. Alice, Noah said decisively. You know how to use flying magic, right? Bring us all over. Okay. Alice agreed without any hesitation. However, as Noah's teammates, Claire and Linley had some understanding of Noah's physique that was resistant to foul curses. We don't have a problem. We can directly support Alice's elven magic, Claire said doubtfully. But your physique can't support elven magic. How are you going to go with us? Noah didn't say anything. Instead, he reached out and grabbed Alice's small hand. "Ah!" Alice cried out in surprise. When she realized what had happened, her pretty face immediately turned red and she cried out in panic. "You! What are you doing? I'd like to ask you what you're doing." Noah was speechless. "My body can't support elven magic. So, Alice, bring me over." "Ugh! Ugh!" Alice forced herself to calm down, but her hand in Noah's hand was trembling. She was obviously very nervous. Noah didn't want to say anything more to this exceptionally pure reaction. He could only urge her. "Hurry up. I know." Alice suppressed her shyness and closed her eyes. "Wind, grant me protection." After chanting the elven magic incantation, a gentle breeze immediately started to swirl without warning. Like an invisible garment, it curled around Claire, Lindley, and Alice. Soon after, under the lead of Alice, who was controlling elven magic, the group of 4 floated into the air and flew towards the elf forest. After passing through the Alicia Elven Academy's buildings and walls, as well as the endless forest of tall trees, Noah's group of 4 flew straight towards the center of the sea of flames that was constantly spreading out due to the intense flames. Because they didn't fly very high, when Noah's group flew into the range of the sea of fire, the high temperature of the flames immediately roasted them, illuminating their faces red. After an unknown amount of time, they finally arrived at the location of the initial explosion thanks to Alice's elven magic. There, the trees had already been blown away by the shocking explosion, leaving behind a charred area. Noah, who was being pulled by Alice and floating in the air, looked down and gradually focused his gaze. Noah's outstanding senses allowed him to sense it. In the center of the sea of flames, there was an unusually violent aura. That aura was actually somewhat familiar. It can't be, just as a guess appeared in Noah's mind, Claire, Lindley, and Alice saw the scene in the thick sea of flames below. To be more precise, they saw a black shadow. A huge black shadow that was at least 10 to 20 meters tall. That's Claire, whose eyes were burning with flames, was the first to clearly see the full appearance of the huge black shadow in the sea of flames. An expression of disbelief appeared on her pretty face. "It's a lie, right?" After Claire, Lindley and Alice also clearly saw the full appearance of the black shadow in the middle of the sea of flames. It was covered in a thick and heavy composite mech. On every part of the mech, there were black cannons mounted on it, pointing in all directions. It was a fortress that looked like a mechanical giant. "That's..." Lindley's expression changed. "Silent fortress. Sister." Alice cried out involuntarily. How could it be?" Not only Claire, Lindley, and Alice, but even Noah didn't dare to believe that it was Versilia's elven device that he had destroyed in 2 or 3 moves yesterday. As for why, the reason was very simple. Although Versilia's elven device was as big as a giant, it was at most 4 to 5 meters tall, definitely not 10 to 20 meters tall. Moreover, Versilia's elven device was that kind of deep red. But this mech fortress in front of them was not only completely black, but there were also sharp spikes everywhere, forming an extremely terrifying and strange shape. It looked like a giant undead spirit. "What's going on?" Alice cried out in shock. "What's going on?" Noah's expression also changed, but a cold voice sounded directly from his heart, dispelling Noah's doubts. "Master, that's a spell engraving." "Aster." Noah was startled at first, then said in surprise. "Did you say spell engraving?" "Yes, that's the appearance of an elven envoy that had its spirit devoured by the spell engraving and lost its mind." Aster's voice sounded in Noah's heart. Moreover, looking at how violent that divine power is, I'm afraid that many spell engraving has been transplanted. It's very dangerous. Just as Aster's voice sounded in Noah's heart, below, in the center of the scorching sea of fire, the black mech giant suddenly raised its head and looked in the direction of Noah's group. In that instant, Claire, Lindsley, and Alice all felt a chill in their hearts. Although Noah did not feel the slightest chill, a warning sign sounded in his heart, causing him to cry out loudly without any hesitation. Careful. Chapter 10:11. Be careful. Almost as soon as Noah's voice fell, the pitch-black mecha giant in the center of the sea of fire below seemed to have discovered Noah's group floating in the sky. A scarlet light suddenly flashed from its eyes. Gotcha! With such a mechanical sound, a huge steel cannon suddenly rose from the mecha giant's shoulder and aimed at Noah's group in the sky. An extremely astonishing divine power gathered at the muzzle. Bang! The next moment, the loud sound of cannon fire reverberated. Constructed from scorching flames, the huge cannon fire with a diameter of 2 to 3 meters was like lightning. It rubbed against the air, causing the whistling winds to tremble and distort crazily. It shot directly at Noah's group in the sky. Finally, like a huge meteorite, the fierce cannon fire crashed down on Noah's group. Boom! Suddenly, a loud rumble resounded in the sky above the sea of fire like a landslide, stirring up a wave of fire. It was like an explosion of fireworks, shaking in all directions. Looking from the direction of the Elven Academy, one could see a dense flame suddenly exploding above the sea of fire. The loud rumble caused even the students in the academy to turn pale. Their ears rang, and they felt dizzy. Without a doubt, if they were hit by such a blow, even the flame elves with extremely high immunity to cannon fire would be annihilated in an instant, without leaving a trace. And if even the elves were like this, there was no need to talk about humans. However, the pitch-black elven magic device that looked like a giant mecha seemed to have sensed something. It turned its head that was originally looking towards the sky and looked towards one of the corners of the sea of fire around it. There, Noah, Claire, Lindley, and Alice just happened to descend from the sky and land on the ground that was scorching hot from the flames. Obviously, under Noah's reminder, Alice reacted at the critical moment. She controlled the flying elven magic and brought Noah's group to successfully avoid that terrifying blow. Looking at the dense flames in the sky caused by the cannon fire just now, Noah frowned slightly. The power of that attack just now couldn't be compared to the power of the artillery bombardment that Versilia displayed against Noah yesterday. The two couldn't be compared at all. If Versilia's cannon fire yesterday could only be considered as the power of an ordinary cannon, then the cannon fire just now was truly at the level of a powerful missile. It was just as Aster had said. Versilia's body might have been transplanted with more spell engravings. Versilia. Claire still couldn't believe that Versilia would launch such a fatal attack on them. She looked at the pitch-black mecha giant in shock. Are you really crazy? That fortress woman. Lindley's pretty face was more or less unsightly. She really did it, sister. Alice couldn't help but take a step forward and yell with a sorrowful expression. What are you doing? Could it be that you really transplanted the spell engravings? It wasn't Versilia's voice that answered Alice. Instead, it was a heavy cannon that was set up in Alice's direction. Bang! The loud sound of the cannon fire wasn't inferior to the previous cannon fire at all. The huge cannon fire that was much larger than a human cut through the air, digging through the soil and sending waves of fire flying. It shot directly in Alice's direction. Alice! Claire and Lindley both cried out in surprise. Noah's legs tightened, and his body tensed up. He was prepared to charge in Alice's direction. At this moment, a majestic voice turned into ripples in the air and gradually spread into everyone's ears. Sword Saint who serves the King of Suns, my knight, fulfill the blood contract here and become a guardian sword. Come to my side. A powerful divine aura suddenly condensed in front of Alice, bringing with it a wave of light particles. Amidst the vibrations in the air, it turned into a tall figure. It was a tall figure covered in pure white armor, holding a knight's sword and shield. He was like a knight, and his entire body rippled with a holy aura. Bang! The huge cannon fire landed on the tall knight's heavy shield and exploded. The scorching waves of fire and dense sand were split into two with the knight holding the heavy shield as the center. It didn't affect Alice behind him. This is... Noah was startled at first, but then his heart stirred and he looked in a direction. There was a person there. A young girl with waist-length purple hair that swayed in the air reached her hand towards Alice. Waves of divine power surged around her. Seeing this young girl, Claire, Linley, and Alice all cried out in surprise. Fianna. It was Fianna who was taken away by Lotus. Under everyone's gaze, Fianna smiled sweetly. This is the holy elemental night elf passed down from generation to generation in the Audisia royal family Geochius. Fianna's delicate face, which was slightly coquettish, was filled with confidence and pride that had never been seen before. He's also my contracted elf. Hearing Fianna's words, everyone looked at the tall elemental night elf. The holy elemental elves, also known as holy elves, were very unique among the elves. One of the reasons why the holy elves were unique was because the holy elemental element was the leader of the 5 elemental elements. The holy elven king of the 5 elven kings was also the elven king who had the deepest influence on the human world and the elemental elven world. Another reason was that elves with holy attributes had always been different from other elves. They were very proud and would choose suitable elves to be their masters based on their own preferences. Even if the other party was witch G, the holy elves would only be willing to open their hearts to a group of especially pure young girls and form a contract with them. Hence, apart from magical fairies who basically couldn't form a contract with humans, there were very few human elven envoys who could possess holy fairies. However, it was not strange that Fianna could have a contract spirit with a holy attribute. No matter what, Fianna was the princess of the Audisia Empire, and she was once a candidate for the elf concubine. If even Witch G couldn't form a contract with a holy elf, then none of the human elven envoys could. Of course, it was precisely because the holy elves were so special that even the slightest accident could lead to problems. Lotus had also said that something had happened to Fianna's contract spirit. Now, it seemed that with Lotus' help, Fianna's contract spirit's problem had been solved. Otherwise, Fianna wouldn't have such confidence and pride on her face. Suddenly, the pitch-black mecha giant shuddered. With a violent movement it hadn't made before, it abruptly turned around and faced behind it. So, you've really been forced to this extent by me. As this voice sounded, a young girl holding a pitch-black knight's sword and wearing a witch's robe slowly walked out of the sea of flames. Her eyes didn't carry any emotion, but the determination and sharpness in her eyes were directed directly at the pitch-black mecha giant. If you're in this state because of me, then let me put an end to it, Versilia Eva Farangelto. As soon as his voice fell, a rich divine power rose from Lotus's body. Like a blue mist that was evaporating, it turned into a wave of air that violently undulated. Feeling the divine aura from Lotus, the memories sleeping in the pitch-black mecha giant's body seemed to have been awakened. Lotus. Shio. Bell. Air. In the next instant, Versilia's sleep-talking voice came out of the pitch-black mecha giant's body as if it was squeezed out. Then, an extremely ominous black aura suddenly shook from the pitch-black mecha giant's body. Woo 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 woo. Versilia's roar finally resounded above the sea of flames. Her voice was like that of a wild beast that had completely lost its mind. Chapter 10-12. In a corner of the elf forest that was engulfed in a sea of fire, waves of fire surged. The high temperature of the fire shook violently, causing the trees to gradually collapse and turn into charcoal. Woo 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 woo. A gigantic black giant with a height of 10 to 20 meters stood in the middle of the sea of fire. Versilia's irrational roar sounded from the black giant, making it seem as if the black giant had gone mad. Ominous black gas fluctuated from its body and spread in all directions. Lien. Asubble, vaguely, he could hear Versilia's roar from within the giant's body. Her voice was filled with an obsession that was deeper than madness. Hearing the voice clearly, Lotus gripped the pitch-black elven device tightly as she stared straight at the giant that seemed to cover the entire sky. The dense divine aura that was fluctuating around her was instantly channeled into the knight's sword in her hand, causing it to emit a dazzling black light. Boom! At the same time, ominous black gas surged out of the black mecha giant's body, turning into tentacle-like whips that cut through the air and swept towards Lotus. However, at the same time, Lotus also swung out the elven device in her hand to meet the oncoming whip. Clang! The incorporeal pitch-black fog collided with the fairy device in Lotus's hand, causing a metallic clanging sound and sparks to erupt. A rather strange force vibrated, causing the whip shadow formed by the pitch-black fog to stagger involuntarily. It brushed past Lien's body and was thrown to the side. Bang! The mist whip didn't slow down in the slightest as it landed on a nearby tree. It directly blew up the burning tree into a pile of wood dregs. Woo 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 woo. This result caused the black mecha giant to roar in anger. The black gas that continuously surged out of its body suddenly flowed, quickly moving along its body and scuttling to one of its giant arms. In the next moment, the giant arm that was covered with spikes and black gas brought along a whistling gust of wind. With a swoosh, it directly swung towards Lotus's direction. In terms of power, this blow was indeed unrivaled. Even Noah, who had the blessing of LV, 4-level ability value, did not want to fight head-on. However, in terms of technique, this attack was too crude. It was impossible to hit a sword dance expert like Lotus. Without any hesitation, Lotus's feet moved and she slightly dodged. The black arms suddenly whistled past Lotus's body and fell into the air. At this moment, Lotus's expression. This was because an ominous black gas suddenly surged from the huge arm that had brushed past Lotus's body and landed in the air. It actually attached itself to Lotus's body and forcefully seized the divine power energy that was fluctuating around Lotus like a phosphorescent wave of energy. This black gas. Lotus eyebrows. It can actually absorb divine aura. You can't fight it head-on, Lotus. Lastia's voice sounded in Lotus's mind. Incantations have always had the effect of changing the elves and elven users' elves' elemental attributes. Right now, the elemental attributes of Versilia Eva Farangelto's divine might have been changed. If you directly touch her, even you will have your divine might stolen. That means... Lotus stared at the ominous black gas that fluctuated around the black mecha giant. The main body of the black gas is Versilia's divine aura that has been changed by the incantation engraving. That's right. Losty softly said. So, it's best not to get close to Versilia. While speaking, the black mecha giant had already retracted its arm. Once again, it swung its arm. Like huge rocks falling from the sky, it violently smashed towards Lotus's direction. This time, Lotus did not rely on her superior technique to perform a small shift. Instead, she nimbly flew out, the tips of her feet touching the ground. Like a ghost, she nimbly dodged the ferocious attacks that fell from the sky. Bang 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 bang. In the center of the elven forest, which was covered in a sea of fire, the sound of violent punches hitting the ground rang out continuously. Every punch caused the ground to tremble violently, sand to tumble, waves of fire to rise and fall, and the atmosphere to distort. The scene was extremely shocking. Sister. Alice's head heated up. Just as she was about to rush out, Noah suddenly grabbed her shoulder. Calm down, Alice. Noah shook his head at Alice. Versilia's obsession with Lotus, you should know best. Just leave it to Lotus. We can't interfere. Alice bit her lips, looking indignant. That was Alice's unwillingness to accept that she was completely unable to help her elder sister. At the same time, she was unwilling to accept that she couldn't stop Versilia from going astray and transplanting the incantation engraving. The one who could empathize with Alice's unwillingness the most was Claire. Because, just like Alice now, Claire could only watch as her sister betrayed the Elven King and became the Elven concubine of Calamity, bringing unimaginable disaster to the entire Osea Empire. At that time, if Claire had the ability to stop Rubia, the Elstein family wouldn't have declined overnight, and even Claire's parents wouldn't have been imprisoned. Claire pressed down on Alice's shoulder just like Noah did, gazing at Alice as she spoke word by word. Now, we can only believe in Lotus Asubble. Although agreeing with Claire's words makes me unhappy, I still agree. Linley closed her eyes and didn't lose her elegance. That's not something we can interfere with. Believe in Lotus Asubble. Fayanna smiled. She's the strongest sword dancer, the object of our dreams. She won't disappoint us. That's right. Noah withdrew his hand from Alice's body, and slowly turned around. He cast his gaze towards a corner of the sea of fire as he said these words. Moreover, we also have things we need to do. Hearing Noah's words, the group of girls subconsciously followed Noah's gaze and looked in the direction Noah was looking. In the next instant, all the girls' expressions changed. Ah! Have I been discovered? Following this somewhat coquettish voice, a tall and graceful figure emerged from the sea of fire. You can still discover me in such a situation. As expected of the only male elven user who can compete with the strongest sword dancer. After speaking, the tall and graceful figure walked out of the sea of fire, revealing her full appearance. Then, the pair of pointy ears attracted everyone's attention. Elfie clan. Claire, Linley, Fayanna, and Alice glanced at each other. Noah looked straight at the tall woman from the Elfie clan and suddenly spoke. You're the merchant from the Skeleton Alliance who snuck into the Elven Academy, came in contact with Versilia, and helped Versilia transplant the spell engravings, right? The merchant from the Skeleton Alliance. Claire, Linley, and Fayanna instantly became vigilant. Alice's face was filled with anger. A gust of wind swept up in her hand and turned into a ceremonial spear, pointing it at Vivian. You're the one who deceived Sister Versilia? How can you say that I deceived her? Versilia willingly accepted my spell engravings. Vivian smiled and turned her gaze to Versilia's direction. Looking at the berserk pitch-black mecha giant, her gaze became scorching hot. However, I also didn't expect that after transplanting so many spell engravings, Versilia actually survived. Although her rationality was swallowed and she fell into a berserk state, to be able to withstand so many spell engravings without dying, this opportunity is really too rare. That child can definitely make a big step forward in my research. After saying this, Vivian looked at Noah's group and suddenly smiled. So, I can't let you touch my experimental subject. After speaking, a red jade-shaped gem appeared in Vivian's hand. That's... Noah immediately recognized that gem. That red jade-shaped gem was the Elven King's blood that Geo Inzak possessed. Chapter 1013. That's, not only Noah, but even Viviana and Alice, who had seen Geo display the blood of the Elven King, recognized the origin of the red gemstone in Vivian's hand. Although Claire and Lindsley didn't know that it was all of Geo Inzak's Elven King's blood, they recognized the Elven King's blood itself. They were both astonished at the sight. Noah narrowed his eyes and looked at Vivian with a cold gaze. Why do you have the blood of the Elven King? This is what Versilia used to pay for a large number of spell engravings. Vivian held the blood of the Elven King tightly, the coquettish smile on her face growing wider and wider. I heard that the power of the Elven King, who can control large numbers of elves, is sealed inside. I used it a little when Versilia lost control and found some good opponents for you. The blood of the Elven King in Vivian's hand started to blossom with a black mist-like light, shrouding Vivian's body. At this moment, in the sea of fire behind Vivian, little bits of light suddenly started to emerge. No, it wasn't light, but eyes. Pairs of eyes seemed to be hiding in the trees at night, intending to hunt, staring at the eyes of wolves like prey. Of course, the eyes were not ordinary wolves. Instead, they were wolf spirits of the fire attribute that were surrounded by flames. It was as if they were made of fire itself. There were more than 1,000 of these wolf spirits, and the reason in their eyes had long since disappeared. All that was left was a dull, lifeless gaze that was being manipulated like marionettes. Under Vivian's special control, their ferocity was aroused. Scarlet, Fenrir, Claire and Lindsley both summoned their contracted spirits and turned them into the most suitable elven equipment, holding them tightly in their hands. Claire whipped the flame whip in her hand against the ground. With a paw sound, the flames on the whip became extremely ferocious. If we fight here, my Scarlet won't lose to any elf. Watch me burn you to ashes. Claire's contracted spirit was a fire cat spirit of the fire attribute. Of course, Scarlet's power would be greatly increased when surrounded by a sea of fire. On the other hand, Lindsley, who had turned Ice Fairy Fenrir into a crystal-like longbow, was secretly speechless. This is truly the worst battle environment. In the sea of fire, Lindsley's ice elves would be weakened and their strength would decrease by a lot. Only Fianna's holy attribute Night Elf Geokias and Alice's wind attribute Magic Wind Elf Smough were not affected by the high temperature and could unleash their full power. However, Fianna was born in the gods' parliament, so she didn't know how to use the battle sword dance, let alone use the elven device. It was impossible for Fianna to play a big role in the battle. Fianna's strength was the ritual god's music and the strong defense of the holy elven knight. However, in such a sea of fire, Fianna couldn't perform the ritual dance with peace of mind. Alice, on the other hand, was a bit impulsive. After knowing what Vivian had done to Versilia, her face was full of anger and she would most likely attack recklessly. If something went wrong and she was injured, she would definitely be drowned by the flame wolf elves in an instant and die without a doubt. In other words, apart from Claire, the other three girls were all at a disadvantage. Vivian, who clearly knew this, had a scheming smile on her face. Unfortunately, Vivian forgot about one person. One person who could change the entire battle situation. Noah, who had been silent all this while, suddenly spoke. This isn't a friendly duel, but a pure slaughter, right? Noah's words stunned everyone, including Vivian. Sorry. Noah lifted his feet and slowly walked towards Vivian, a sharp glint flashing through his deep eyes. For me, numbers don't have much meaning. When this sentence came out from Noah's mouth, the space behind Noah that was dyed red by the sea of fire suddenly distorted. Whing! Amidst the tremors, golden ripples that resembled water ripples suddenly undulated from Noah's back. What's that? Vivian had an ominous premonition in her heart, causing her to speak without hesitation. Let's go. Flame Wolf Elves. The Flame Wolf Elves' army that appeared from the sea of fire shot out bloody light from their eyes. Roar, 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 roar. In the next second, the overwhelming pack of flame wolves roared wantonly and charged in Noah's direction, bringing with them an extremely high temperature as they surged over like a tide. Looking at the overwhelming flame wolf elves' army, Noah just slowly raised one hand. The golden ripples that covered Noah's back suddenly burst out bursts of energy waves that were hard to detect. After that, numerous sabers, swords, spears, halberds, and various other weapons with gorgeous and extravagant designs abruptly shot out from the numerous golden ripples, and they faced the army of flame wolf fairies that were surging forward like fish. With a shake, they shot up explosively. Like a stream of light, the rain of precious artifacts that covered the sky and the earth met with the army of flame wolves that covered the sky and the earth. Bang! The flame wolf spirit that was charging at the very front was directly shot by a spear. Its entire body exploded into a cluster of sparks in an instant. It didn't even have the time to let out a scream before it disappeared into the air. Bang 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 bang. After the first flame wolf elves that were shot, a series of muffled sounds rang out one after another, following closely behind. Every time a sound rang out, one of the flame wolf elves that were charging at them violently would be shot by Noah's relics, exploding into sparks all over the sky. And every time a round of relics was shot out, a new one would pop out from the golden ripples behind Noah. In the vibrations of the air, they all shot out rapidly. Not long after, the group of flame wolf elves that numbered over 1,000 were almost all blasted apart by the treasures that shot over like streams of light. They scattered into sparks that filled the sky and merged into the surrounding sea of fire, disappearing without a trace. In the end, there were less than 100 flame wolf elves that were scattered around Vivian to protect her. The flames that surrounded them illuminated Vivian's shocked face. What? What's that? Claire, Lindsley, Fayanna, and Alice were all shocked. Not to mention Viviana and Alice, even Claire and Lindsley, who had been teammates with Noah for nearly half a month, didn't know that Noah had such a trick up his sleeve. The only thing that could be confirmed was that those luxurious-looking weapons were definitely not elven devices. However, in terms of power, each of those weapons was not inferior to the elven devices used by elven users. Lotus, who was fighting with the pitch-black mecha giant that Versilia had transformed into, also noticed the commotion over here. She glanced sideways at Noah, whose back was covered with golden ripples, with a somewhat dignified expression in her eyes. That person actually hid such a trick. Ignoring everyone's shock, Noah looked at Vivian and raised his hand again. A sword immediately popped out from a golden ripple beside him. As Noah waved his hand, it turned into a stream of light, piercing through the air like lightning, and swept toward Vivian's direction. Bang! A muffled sound sounded again. It was the sound of Noah's noble phantasm exploding a flame wolf spirit that had appeared in front of Vivian and blocked a fatal blow for her. Vivian had already reacted. She knew that now was not the time to be shocked. She held the blood of the Elf King tightly and dissipated like a cloud of mist. When she reappeared, she was already beside Versilia's pitch-black mecha giant. Sure enough, it's a bit difficult to rely on the blood of the Elf King to deal with an elven user who is comparable to the most powerful sword dancer. Vivian forced a smile. But, I still have the most powerful weapon here. The blood of the Elf King in Vivian's hand suddenly emitted black smoke, which lingered around the pitch-black mecha giant. Oh! In the pitch-black mecha giant, Versilia's painful roars gradually sounded. At this moment, the violent and ferocious aura on the pitch-black mecha giant became even more intense. Chapter 10:14. Poof! The ferocious aura surging from Versilia's elven device was mixed with the ominous black aura of divine might and the black mist from the blood of the elven king that sealed the Mad King's elf. It spread throughout the sea of flames, stirring up a sinister black wind. Suddenly, the surrounding sea of fire was blown by the eerie black wind. The center of the entire sea of fire was swaying, and the rising and falling waves of fire seemed to have solidified, stopping in midair. Ah! Versilia's roar sounded like the high-pitched howl of a wild beast. Everyone's hearts skipped a beat when they heard it. Vivian was the only one who wasn't disturbed by the beast-like roar. Instead, she smiled with elation. Even this didn't break you, Versilia. You're amazing. As an experimental subject, you'll definitely make those who study the runes go crazy with joy. Hearing this, Noah and Lotus both turned their cold gazes to Vivian. Even Claire, Lindley, and Fayanna were more or less angry. This merchant of the Elfie Skeleton Alliance did not care about the lives of others in order to study the runes. As long as it could advance Vivian's research, Vivian wouldn't mind sacrificing 1 or 2 lives, right? As a matter of fact, many elven messengers had already died due to Vivian's incantation. Most of them couldn't even withstand the side effects of the incantation, and even their minds had collapsed. It could be said that they were worse than death. Filthy merchant of the Skeleton Alliance. Alice yelled. What did you do to Sister Versilia? Nothing much. I'm just using the power of the Mad King's elf to squeeze out the potential of this child's elf potential, Vivian said with a smile. With Versilia's original power and the support of the large amount of runes, as well as my control, this child can defeat even the strongest sword dancer. With that said, under Vivian's control, the black mecha giant suddenly raised the 2 heavy cannons on its arms and pointed them at everyone in front of it. Everyone, including Noah, Lotus, Claire, Linley, Fayeanna, and Alice. Bang! 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 Amidst the fierce bombardment, the muzzles of the 2 heavy cannons that were set up by the black mecha giant flashed with flames one after another, causing huge cannon fire to pour out like a machine gun, turning into a violent bombardment like raindrops that shrouded Noah's group. In an instant, everyone's field of vision was filled with the huge cannons. They watched helplessly as the cannons rained down on them, and all of them revealed looks of shock. Looking at the fierce cannon fire, Noah waved his hand fiercely. Whing! A huge golden ripple spread out from the ground. Immediately after, a thick and heavy shield suddenly rushed out from the golden ripples and blocked in front of everyone. The fierce cannon fire enveloped like raindrops suddenly all fell on the huge shield. Bang! 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 The next moment, the violent impact waves and the strong fire waves exploded in front of the huge shield at the same time, stirring up turbulence all over the sky. It swept in all directions and shook the ground until it cracked inch by inch. Noah and the others, who were protected behind the huge shield, were not affected at all. Taking a closer look, the huge shield was like a city wall, with golden flower petals embedded in the middle of the shield as an ornament. If Gilgamesh was here, he would definitely recognize the origin of this shield. Blazing 7-fold rings, Law Ajax. To be more precise, it should be said that it was the prototype of Blazing 7-fold rings, Law Ajax. Gilgamesh had used this relic before, and he called it the Shield of God. It was undoubtedly the highest level of relic that had an invincible defense against throwing weapons. Ah! Facing the impenetrable huge shield, Versilia was like a mad beast. She let out a mournful roar, while constantly firing her cannons. The cannons continued to bombard the huge shield, causing the sky shaking explosions and shockwaves of flames. Alice felt as though her heart was being sliced by a knife when she heard Versilia's shrill cries. She endured the pain, grabbed Noah's hand, and begged, "Don't worry, Noah. Don't worry. Don't worry. Noah, I beg you, please save Sister Versilia." Alice's pleading stunned Noah. Alice was a very serious and stubborn girl. As the head of Wind King Knights, it was really not easy for this young girl to plead others for help. She was aiming to become an excellent knight. Noah could only look at Alice's pleading face and closed his eyes. Then, he took out the elven device that had transformed into a dagger from his back. "Aster, it's time." The dagger in Noah's hand emitted a dazzling light and turned into a shiny silver holy sword. "Sorry, I know you want to end the feud between you and Versilia." Noah held the holy sword tightly in his hand and looked up at Lotus. "However, there are 2 of them now. If we attack together, it won't be considered breaking the rules, right?" Lotus looked straight at Noah and saw Noah's unquestionable expression. After a long while, she sighed and nodded. "I understand." The 2 of them looked at each other and stepped forward at the same time. Behind the huge shield, two figures turned into two streams of light and flashed out from the left and right sides of the shield at the same time. They drew a perfect arc and flew toward the black mecha giant in front of them. "Is he here?" Vivian couldn't help but take a step back as she shouted in a delicate voice. "Go!" A black fog gushed out from the black mecha giant beside Vivian and gradually condensed into a whip shadow. It swung in the air and shot out, leaving a mark on the hard ground. It violently whipped toward Noah and Lotus. In the face of the oncoming whip shadow, Noah and Lotus trembled at the same time. Their speed suddenly soared like lightning. Before the whip shadow could fall, they had already arrived in front of the pitch-black mecha giant. Absolute sword skill. Primary form purple lightning. Two cold sword lights, one white and one black, appeared at the same time and heavily fell on the black mecha giant. Puchi. Two chilling sword lights slashed across the body of the black mecha giant, piercing through its shoulders. With a loud tearing sound, the two gigantic arms of the black mecha giant were directly severed, falling to the ground with a loud crash. Ah! Versilia's roar became even crazier. This was caused by Vivian, who had watched the black mecha giant's arm being chopped off, forcibly controlling the black mecha giant to attack while her expression changed. Thus, two heavy cannons were set up on the shoulders of the black mecha giant. Shocking divine might energy was converted into a terrifying cannon blast that shot towards Noah and Lotus. However, when they saw the two cannons shooting toward them, Noah and Lotus actually advanced instead of retreating. With great tacit understanding, they rushed forward. The holy sword and demon sword in their hands surged with dense divine might as they swung their swords at the incoming cannons. Bang! The sharp weapons collided with the fierce cannons, setting off a violent wave of fire. However, Vivian was suddenly shocked. The violent wave of fire suddenly rotated and turned into two flaming vortexes. One of the vortexes was absorbed by the two highest-level elven devices, one white and one black. Holding the elven devices that carried the two scorching flames, Noah and Lotus rushed out of the fire wave. In a flash, they suddenly appeared in front of the black mecha giant. Absolute sword skill. Form 4 flame cut. The holy sword and demon sword that carried the violent flaming vortexes blasted out like a violent wind wheel, fiercely bombarding the black mecha giant. Dong! A terrifying loud sound resounded through the sky. Chapter 10:15. Dong! The holy sword and the demonic sword slammed into the mecha giant, creating a deafening boom. At the same time, the fire vortex exploded, turning into a terrifyingly high temperature that instantly enveloped Versilia's elven magic equipment. Ah! Within the raging flames, Versilia let out a painful wail. The ominous black gas around the elven device evaporated under the heat of the flames, turning into smoke and disappearing into thin air. However, the buff from the large number of spell engravings made Versilia's power endless. Even if she was burned in the violent flames, she still persisted bitterly and didn't fall. Seeing this, Noah and Lotus, who were holding the demon slayer and vorpal sword, nimbly retreated with the help of the blast wind. After landing firmly on the ground, they looked at each other. "Looks like I have no choice but to go all out." Lotus's eyes flashed. She stared at Versilia, who was struggling to hold on in the raging flames, and suddenly spoke. "Since you also know the absolute sword skill, you should be able to use that move, right?" That move. Noah was startled at first, then he seemed to understand what Lotus was talking about. His eyebrows twitched. Noah and Lotus used a variety of absolute sword skills. Sword skill for body destruction, initial form, purple lightning. Group annihilation sword technique, form 3, shadow moon dance. Destructive sword technique, form 6, shattered tooth. There was also a sword technique that countered certain attributes, using a unique frequency of divine might energy to absorb the opponent's flames, neutralizing the opponent's attack while at the same time using the power of the flames to superimpose on one's own divine might energy to perform an even more powerful attack. Form 4, Flame Slash. These sword skills were able to display unimaginable effects and effects under specific battle situations. The move that Lotus mentioned was not only the most powerful of the absolute sword skills, but it was also not used against elven users. It was a destructive sword skill used to defeat large elves. According to Gray and Vaz, this move was originally a dual sword skill, but if the user's skill was high enough, they could use it even with a single weapon. And once this sword technique was practiced to the extreme, then even among all the elves, apart from the Elf King, the highest level demon god level elves could be killed. Although it's an ultimate sword skill used to deal with large elves, but if it's you and I, even if the opponent is an elven user, we can still use it, right? Lotus stared closely at the pitch-black mecha giant and said. Moreover, even if it's not a large elven device, Versilia's size is enough to be used against absolute sword skill. Hearing this, Noah tightened his grip on the holy sword in his hand and stared at the black mecha giant in the flames. Think carefully. This isn't the elemental elf realm. We can't turn damage into mental attacks. If Versilia is hit by that move, she might die. So, we can only destroy Versilia's elven device, Lotus said without hesitation. You can't hurt Versilia. You really know how to give people difficult problems, Noah said sarcastically, but the corners of his mouth slowly rose. I hope your hands won't tremble. Tremble. Lotus's mouth also slowly rose. You too. Facing the black mecha giant that was much larger than them and as ferocious as a ferocious beast, Noah and Lotus merely gripped the swords in their hands tightly. Amidst the waves of fire and wind, they chatted cheerfully shoulder to shoulder with a fearless expression on their faces. Seeing this scene, Claire, Linley, Fayanna, and Alice were all a bit absent-minded. Vivian, on the other hand, seemed to be enraged and fearful as she let out a sharp cry. I don't believe that Versilia can't defeat 2 elven users with so many spell engravings. Then, Vivian smashed the Elven King's blood on the ground heavily. Bam! The priceless Elven King's blood was shattered into a pile of fragments in response to the sound. However, from the shattered blood of the Elven King, a black mist that was much darker than any of the previous mist rose up. Like a poisonous snake, it burrowed into Versilia's elven device. Ah! Instantly, the black aura around the black mecha giant increased exponentially. The black fog, so dark that it looked like sewage, wrapped tightly around the black mecha giant. Like the most profound curse, it stirred up waves of violent turbulence. At this moment, the Mad King's elf sealed in the Elven King's blood was completely released. All of his power merged with Versilia's contracted elf, drawing out all of Versilia's potential beyond her limits. Ah! As Versilia roared in a completely irrational manner, the black mecha giant raised an arm. Hum! The black arm that was covered with sharp thorns suddenly expanded several times under the infusion of the ominous black mist. Like an iron tower that fell from the sky, it brought with it a whistling wind and distorted space as it fiercely smashed toward Noah and Lotus. The huge fist had yet to truly come into contact with Noah and Lotus, but the powerful wind brought about by the fist blew against Noah and Lotus, causing their clothes to flutter wildly and stick close to their skin. Noah and Lotus just stared at the huge fist that was rapidly expanding in their eyes. Under the extremely terrifying power of the blow, their bodies suddenly trembled. Bam! Finally, the huge fist that fell from the sky like an iron tower heavily bombarded the ground where Noah and Lotus were standing, causing a thunderous explosion that erupted from the center of the elven forest. The moment the rumbling sound exploded, the most frightening attack wave since the start of the battle surged out from the middle of the battlefield. It was as though one could clearly see it with one's naked eye. It transformed into a substance-like ripple that spread out within a couple of blinks of an eye. Only after it spread to a distance of dozens of meters away did it gradually disappear. As for the trembling of the ground, it couldn't be stopped no matter what. It was also because of this that Claire, Linley, Viviana, Alice, and even Vivian, who were caught off guard by the trembling of the ground, didn't notice it. On the two sides of the black mecha giant that was bombarding the ground, two figures suddenly flashed out. Clang! Dazzling white light and rich black light burst out from the demon slayer and the Vorpal's sword at the same time, instantly illuminating the entire space that was dyed red by the sea of fire. At the same time, an astonishing divine power spread out from Noah and Lotus like phosphorescence, surging in all directions like a tide. The two figures holding the demon slayer and the Vorpal's sword seemed to flash across the space with the black mecha giant as the center. Suddenly, they crossed each other. Absolute sword skill. Formbreaker ardent flower spiral sword dance 18 consecutive slashes. The holy sword and demon sword emitting white light and black light instantly turned into countless sword rays that crisscrossed on the black mecha giant. Poochie 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 poochie. Along with the chaotic slashing sounds, the huge body of the black mecha giant was cut apart by the sword rays. Along the sword rays, each part of the mecha giant slid down one by one, spewing out pitch-black mist, and collapsed in one breath. Boom! A muffled explosion resounded. The black mecha fortress that was like a giant that blotted out the sky suddenly exploded, turned into specks of starlight, and disappeared in the air. Among them, Versilia, whose whole body was covered with ferocious brands, closed her eyes tightly and fell to the ground due to gravity. She made a muffled sound, and her delicate body kept convulsing. On the two sides of the starlight that filled the sky, Noah and Lotus had their backs facing each other. Their backs were straight, and their robes were fluttering in the wind. It was a very beautiful scene. Chapter 10:16. Crackle, crackle crackle crackle, the sound of trees being burned rang out in the dense sea of flames, reverberating in the forest that had suddenly lost all other sounds. Ugh! Versilia let out a bitter groan. Her body was spasming. Her entire body was engraved with ferocious scar-like brands. It was quite a shocking sight. If you were to count them, it would be a meaningless matter. There were at least dozens of runes engraved on Versilia's body, if not hundreds of them, then there were at least dozens of them. This didn't even include the runes engraved on Versilia's body. If one were to count the runes in Versilia's body, such as the runes in her heart, there would be at least 100 of them. Ordinary elven envoys might have a mental breakdown in an instant after engraving even a single rune on them. Versilia, on the other hand, had not only engraved the runes on her heart, but she had also implanted hundreds of runes all over her body. The side effects of all the runes added together could kill hundreds or thousands of elven envoys, let alone one elven envoys, right? However, even though Versilia's mind was devoured by the runes and she lost her mind, she still held on and didn't die. The reason was because of a single obsession. Lien. A subtle, the soft voice from Versilia's mouth contained the root of all the obsessions in her heart. Hearing this voice, Lien's hand that was holding onto the elven envoy subconsciously tightened. She lowered her head and slowly walked towards Versilia, arriving in front of her. Lien. A subtle. Versilia seemed to have recovered a bit of consciousness. She raised her eyes with difficulty and cast her gaze towards Lien. Versilia. Lotus looked into Versilia's eyes. Just this point alone made Versilia's pained expression soften a lot. 3 years ago, the strongest sword dancer had defeated Versilia with a single strike. Versilia didn't even exist in her eyes. Because of this, Versilia had developed such a deep obsession, all for the sake of making Lien acknowledge her. At this moment, Lien's clear eyes were indeed looking at Versilia. Just this point alone was enough to make Versilia overjoyed, with a hint of bitterness. In the end, even so, I still couldn't defeat you. Hearing this, Lien shook her head. You're wrong, Versilia. You're much stronger than me. Ha! Versilia laughed at herself. Are you trying to comfort me? The one who answered Versilia was not Lotus, but Noah. She's telling the truth. Noah also came in front of Versilia and stood side by side with Lotus. He looked down at Versilia from the corner of his eyes. At the very least, there isn't a single elven user who can withstand over 100 spells without dying like you, not even the strongest sword dancer. Lotus nodded and said to Versilia. Although you've once walked the wrong path, I've seen how tenacious your will is. That's why, Versilia, I must tell you that you're truly very strong, even stronger than me. Versilia's eyes trembled. She looked at the man and woman standing in front of her, holding a pure white holy sword and a pitch-black magic sword. She slowly closed her eyes. In the end, what remained on Versilia's face was satisfaction and calmness. She no longer had the coldness and stubbornness of the past. Seeing this, Lotus couldn't help but step forward. Don't worry. Noah voiced out Lotus's concern. Versilia isn't dead yet. But... Lotus looked at Noah. She still has spells on her body. Ace has the highest level of spell resistance that can even erase elven spells. Noah raised the holy sword in his hand. With Ace's power, he should be able to erase all the spells on Versilia's body. After saying that, Noah pressed the holy sword in his hand against Versilia's body, and he poured his divine might into her body. Brilliant white light shone from the holy sword in Noah's hand and enveloped Versilia's body. Chi! Under the brilliant white light, the spell runes all over Versilia's body that looked like ferocious scars seemed to be burned by flames. Light smoke rose from all over her body and gradually dissipated in the light smoke. Seeing this scene, Lien's expression eased. Impossible. On the other side, Vivian, the spell engraving merchant from the Skeleton Alliance, slowly stepped back. She looked at Versilia lying in front of Noah and Lotus with shock and fear on her face. How could I possibly lose to one or two elven envoys when I have so many runes and engravings? Indeed. Versilia's strength was at the peak of the elven user level. Even in the Elven Sword Dance Festival that gathered the best elven users under the age of 20, Versilia's strength was definitely at the highest level. Under such circumstances, coupled with the buffs of nearly 100 spells, not to mention ordinary elven users, even Grey and Vath, who were known as the strongest elven users on the continent, would have to suffer in front of Versilia, who had transformed into a violent beast. Versilia could no longer be called an elven user. However, such a Versilia was also not facing an ordinary elven user. Noah had a LV for ability value buff. His strength was comparable to Hercules in the current world in the form of a servant. His contracted elven was also the strongest existence among all sword elves. Lotus's body contained the power of the Dark Elf King. Her contracted elven user was also the highest-ranked Dark Elf who had the responsibility of guiding the Dark Elf King. To put it bluntly, whether it was Noah or Lotus, they had exceeded the strength of an elven user. In this way, even if Noah or Lotus, one of them could deal with Versilia alone, let alone working together. Unless Versilia could transplant over 1,000 spells and not die. Otherwise, it was really impossible to win against either Noah or Lotus. Not to mention, Noah had not used his hidden strength, and Lotus had not drawn out all the power of the Dark Elf King. This result was also natural. Vivian could only turn around in fear and wanted to run in the other direction of the forest. Whoosh! At this moment, an arrow made of ice brushed past Vivian's cheek and shot in front of Vivian. At the same time, it cut a wound on Vivian's cheek and nailed to the trunk of a tree in front of Vivian. Want to escape? Holding an ice crystal longbow, Lindsly showed an elegant smile in Vivian's direction. Although I don't expect the merchants of the Skeleton Alliance to understand etiquette, since you didn't greet the host, as a guest, casually leaving the table is not a good habit. Vivian retreated in fear. Just as she was about to turn in another direction, a black shadow suddenly appeared in front of her and blocked her way. They were night fairies who were fully equipped with pure white armor and wielded great swords and shields. Even if you are a merchant of the Skeleton Alliance, it is not easy to sneak into the territory of the Elven Academy, right? Viviana smiled sweetly at Vivian. In that case, it is so difficult to sneak in. Why don't you leave in such a hurry? Looking at the tall elf knight, Vivian retreated once again. However, at the same time, a long whip cut through the hot air and wrapped around Vivian's foot with a snap. Vivian instantly lost her balance and fell heavily to the ground, letting out a painful groan. It is all because of you that so many troublesome things have happened. Claire, who tightly grasped the handle of the long whip, shouted in a delicate voice. Watch me burn you to a crisp. Hearing this, before Vivian could react, a ceremonial spear suddenly appeared in front of her. Filthy merchant of the Skeleton Alliance, Alice looked down at Vivian and said coldly. You will use your whole life to atone for what you have done to my sister. Unprecedented despair and fear surged in Vivian's heart. She finally couldn't help but let out a terrified cry. Ah! The mournful scream echoed in the sea of fire in the forest for a long time. Chapter 10:17. Dusk gradually descended. Many people were gathered at the entrance of Alicia Elven Academy. It wasn't just the students of Alicia Elven Academy gathered here. There were also Elven Knights wearing the uniform of the Empire's Elven Knight Order. At this moment, these Elven Knights from the Empire were guarding the front of a carriage, waiting for someone to ride it. The person planning to ride the carriage was Versilia. Standing in front of the academy gates, Versilia's gaze swept past the group of girls in front of her. As far as Versilia's eyes could see, Claire, Linley, Fianna, and Alice were all present. Even Gravath was present. Everyone, please go back, Versilia said to the group of people who were staring at her. I'm only a criminal now, not the strongest elven caster the Academy is proud of. I'm going to the Imperial capital to atone for my crimes. It's not worth it for you to send me off with such fanfare. Ever since the end of the Lambard War, transplanting runes have been seen as a taboo. If an elven caster transplanted a rune without permission, it was equivalent to a crime. Even if she was the strongest elven caster in Alicia Elven Academy, and the eldest daughter of the Duke of Frangelto family, who controlled the military lifeline of the Empire, Versilia still had to bear this crime. Thus, even if all the runes on Versilia's body were removed by Noah, this crime still couldn't be erased. Thus, Versilia was about to be sent to the Empire for trial. It was very likely that she would be sentenced to prison. Who knew how long it would take for her to be released? Even so, Versilia's face was still filled with calmness. She no longer had the persistence of the past. Under the erosion of so many runes, I'm quite satisfied to be able to survive like this. Versilia pursed her lips and smiled. She didn't look like a cold knight anymore. Instead, she looked like an ordinary girl. Originally, even if the runes were removed from my body, the accumulated side effects of the runes would erupt and make me bear all the consequences. It's all thanks to that man's help that I can stand here safe and sound. I should be satisfied. Speaking of which, it's really surprising, Claire exclaimed. You can actually recover so quickly after suffering so many side effects of the spell engraving. What did Noah do? I more or less saw the process. Linley thought back to what she had seen. It seems that after removing the runes on Versilia's body, Noah took out a bottle of potion. That's right. Versilia nodded. It's because I drank that potion that I could recover so quickly. Student Noah actually has such a miraculous thing. Fianna's eyes flashed with a sly light. It seems that there are many secrets hidden in his body. I really have to thank him. Alice couldn't help but smile. No matter what, it was because of him and Lena Subble that my sister was saved. Versilia's eyes. In the end, the two of them didn't come. Hearing Versilia's words, the girls fell silent. They knew that the two people Versilia was talking about were definitely Noah and Lotus. However, neither Noah nor Lotus appeared here to send Versilia off. However, thinking about it carefully, it didn't seem strange. Noah didn't get along with Versilia. He only came in contact with Versilia because of Lotus' request. It was also because of Alice's request that he joined hands with Lotus to save Versilia, remove the runes on Versilia's body, and even took out precious potions to help Versilia recover. Lotus, on the other hand, wanted to repay the sin of leading Versilia astray because of her. Versilia didn't have a direct relationship with Versilia, so she naturally wouldn't come. The latter was supposed to send Versilia off, more or less. But firstly, Lotus didn't enter Alicia Elven Academy through the proper channels. Secondly, Lotus was extremely disgusted with Gray and Vash. Now, Gray and Vash were here. It wasn't strange that Lotus didn't appear. However, regardless of whether it was Noah or Lotus, they had left a deep impression on Versilia in some way. It was natural that she wanted to see Noah and Lotus before going to the imperial capital to be punished. Alright, you don't have to look like that. Seeing that the girls didn't know what to say, Versilia helplessly shook her head. I'm a sinner. With those two's nobility, they naturally shouldn't come here. Versilia didn't have any hatred for Lotus. On the contrary, Versilia, like the rest of the elves, looked forward to having Lotus as their daughter. In Versilia's opinion, Noah, who possessed the same sword dance as Lotus and whose strength was on par with Lotus, was also a noble figure. Therefore, this sentence was completely Versilia's true thoughts. Sister, Alice mustered up her courage and said to Versilia, I believe that no matter what kind of path you take next, those two will be watching you closely. Claire, Linley, and Fayanna nodded as well, which made Versilia smile. That's what I hope too. Then, Versilia stepped forward and patted Alice's head. Alice, I'm looking forward to your performance at the Elven Sword Dance Festival. Alice's eyes reddened as she felt the long-awaited gentleness and warmth from her sister. She suppressed the emotions in her heart and nodded heavily. Sister, I will definitely obtain the right to participate in the Elven Sword Dance Festival and achieve results that don't disappoint the Frangerto family's reputation as a knight. I believe in you. Versilia's face was filled with gentleness. Then, she looked at Gray and Vash and bowed. I'm really sorry, Gray and Vash. I've caused you trouble. Don't mind it. If you can still cause trouble, it means that you're still young. That's a good thing. Gray and Vash looked at Versilia. I only hope that you won't go down the wrong path in the future. Versilia Eva Frangerto will remember. Versilia nodded and looked around at everyone again. Then, everyone, I'll be leaving now. I hope to see you again in the future. After saying that, Versilia boarded the carriage without any hesitation. Under the escort of the Elven Knights, they began their journey. Claire, Linley, Fayanna, Alice, and Gray and Vash stood side by side and watched the carriage leave. Sitting in the carriage, Versilia suddenly felt a gaze that made her look outside the window. She looked at the top of a building in Alicia Elven Academy. Over there, a young girl dressed in a witch costume stood against the wind, watching Versilia leave. At this moment, Versilia's heart felt like it was stuffed with something. She only felt satisfaction. Standing in the howling wind, Lotus watched the carriage carrying Versilia leave. Her gaze didn't move for even half a second. 3 years ago, for her own wish, Lotus didn't look directly at any of her opponents. She also didn't look directly at Versilia. This time, Lotus would watch Versilia leave. "Since you're so worried, why don't you send Versilia off?" A leisurely voice sounded from behind Lotus. Lotus wasn't surprised at all. She didn't even turn her head. "Anyway, we'll meet again, right?" Upon hearing Ren's answer, Noah, who had appeared behind her out of nowhere, curled his lips and smiled. "You're quite humane. Aren't you the same?" Lotus closed her eyes. Logically speaking, after being affected by the side effects of so many runes, even if Versilia's body was healed, her abilities as an elven user would still be affected. "But you even healed this part. There's no need for that, right? You're thinking too much. That's because the effects of the recovery potion were too good. It has nothing to do with me." Noah shrugged and walked to Lotus' side and looked into the distance. "Are you planning to leave?" Chapter 10:18. Are you planning to leave? The howling wind drowned out this sentence, causing Noah's voice to disappear in an instant. If Lotus did not hear this, it would not be strange at all. Thus, Lotus remained silent and did not say anything. However, it was this attitude that made Noah understand. Lotus must have heard it. With regards to Lotus, Noah more or less had some understanding of her. Although she was very mysterious in all aspects, at the end of the day, this girl who was known as the strongest sword dancer, who enjoyed supreme glory and was worshipped by almost all the witches in the world, was actually just an ordinary girl. He would regret his past wrongdoings. She wanted to make up for her past mistakes. She cared about the safety of others. At the same time, she cared about others, took care of others, and did not hesitate to go through water and tread on fire for those close to her. Otherwise, there was no need for Lotus to return to Alicia Elf Academy because of Versilia's matter. Otherwise, there was no need for Lotus to help Fianna solve the problem of contracting a spirit because of their past interactions. In short, this girl who was extremely famous in this world, in Noah's opinion, was a good person. However, Lotus also had a lot of responsibilities on her shoulders. For example, the good and bad that came with the title of the strongest sword dancer. For example, the power of the Dark Elf King. For example, the world fragment that existed in Lotus's body and fundamentally changed Lotus' fate. These things made Lotus destined to have an extraordinary life. Noah's relationship with the world was not small. In Noah's opinion, since Lotus' fate changed because of the world fragment, then he had the responsibility to bear all of Lotus' fate. It was because of this that Noah agreed to Lotus's request and helped her test Versilia. However, because he understood Lotus's character, Noah was even more troubled. Now, the world fragment was with Noah. If Noah wanted to take it back, he could not say that he could at any time, but it was not impossible. However, Noah did not know how to take the world fragment from Lotus's heart without hurting her. Therefore, how could Noah not feel troubled? Lotus did not know if she had noticed Noah's dilemma, but she suddenly spoke. "To be honest, I'm not at all interested in the thing in my body that can even change the will of the Dark Elf King and make the power of the Dark Elf King not choose to reincarnate into a male but into me, as well as the origin of you who possesses this inconceivable thing." "Is that so?" Noah was slightly startled, and then he smiled bitterly. "It's something that fundamentally changed your fate. You really don't mind?" "If I say that I don't mind, then I must be lying." Lotus was silent for a while and then said this sentence. "Otherwise, I wouldn't come to you. You to say." Noah looked up at the elven forest outside Alicia Elven Academy and asked, "When did you notice it?" Noah was naturally asking when Lotus had detected the existence of the world fragment. Noah was more or less surprised by Lotus's answer. "From the very beginning, ever since I gained consciousness, I felt its existence as if it was in the unseen world." In the beginning. Noah was really surprised. One must know that even Orpheus could not detect the existence of the world fragment in his body. He could only passively endure the influence of the world fragment, which was why he came to find Noah. Lotus, on the other hand, actually knew about the existence of the world fragment from the beginning. However, thinking about it carefully, it was not that strange. Although Lotus was not as strong as Orpheus, the existence of the world fragment came in all kinds of forms. Some could not be seen except for Noah. Some could be seen and touched by anyone. It was not strange that Lotus could detect it. Then, have you never thought of figuring out what it is? Noah asked doubtfully. Anyone would feel uneasy if there was an unknown thing residing in their body, right? That's true, but so far, it has not brought me any adverse effects. Lotus said lightly as if she was not talking about her own affairs. Although I inherited the power of the Dark Elf King because of its existence, similarly, without it, not only would the power of the Dark Elf King not be able to perfectly awaken, but it might also devour me and turn me into a resentful spirit like the demon King Solomon. That might be the case. Then. Noah was silent for a moment, then sighed. You have never thought of taking it out? Indeed, I have never thought of it. Lotus's tone did not have any confusion. Of course, there is also Lastia's firm opposition. That child thinks that I can perfectly awaken and control the power of the Dark Elf King because of the inexplicable existence in my body. If I take it out, the power of the Dark Elf King is likely to go berserk. So, you really don't care about anything? Noah frowned. Even if you know that I want to take it back, you don't care. I don't care. Lotus's tone still did not have any confusion, and similarly, there was no falsehood in it. However, this time around, Lotus turned around and looked straight at Noah. She spoke with great determination. Whether it is the origin of the thing in my body, whether it is related to you, the influence of the power of the Dark Elf King, or what will happen to me if I take it out, I don't care about any of these. I just feel that since my fate has changed because of this, then I should fight you for it. That's all. Hearing this, Noah finally understood Lotus's thoughts. This girl kept saying that her fate had changed because of the world fragment, but in fact, she did not want her fate to be decided by other things. Since the beginning of this life of Lienus Subbles was not decided by himself, then the end of this life should be decided by himself. This was the reason why Lotus did not care about the world fragment, but was somewhat obsessed with Noah. In short, Lotus's true purpose was not to investigate the origin of the world fragment, nor to contact Noah. She also did not want to investigate the relationship between Noah and the world fragment. She only wanted to prove her own will through Noah, who had an extraordinary relationship with the world fragment that had changed her fate. That's right. Like Versilia, Lotus only wanted to prove herself. To prove that even if the beginning and process of her life had been changed by an unknown existence, it did not mean that this girl did not have her own will. I can clearly feel that something in my body is desperately wanting to return to your side, Lotus said as she stared at Noah, emphasizing each and every word. However, since it has taken the liberty of lodging in my body and changed my life and fate, then, if it wants to leave, it must first ask for my permission. From Lotus's words, Noah could hear an unprecedentedly strong will. It was not a willpower that existed to make things difficult for Noah, nor was it a willpower that existed to get to the bottom of things, nor was it a willpower that existed to complain. It was simply a willpower that existed to prove its own willpower. So, if you want to take it back, then defeat me. Lotus turned around and once again faced the vast scenery of the academy, her voice slowly reverberating in the surroundings. Defeat me, and no matter how you want to take it back, I will cooperate. Leaving these words behind, Lotus leaped and fell into the thicket below. Her figure gradually disappeared from there. In the end, Lotus only left one sentence for Noah. I will be waiting for you at the Elven Sword Dance Festival. Noah lowered his eyes and looked in the direction that Lotus disappeared in, not saying anything for a long time. Because, other than Lotus's words, there was another girl who left a message for Noah. For Lotus's sake, I will not let her lose to you. As soon as the voice fell, a pitch-black feather slowly floated down from the horizon. Noah reached out his hand and caught the pitch-black feather. He stared at the pitch-black feather for a long time before helplessly speaking. It seems that the troubles I have to deal with in this world will not end so easily. Chapter 10:19. Master. Please wake up. Master. In his sleep, Noah heard a very pleasant but emotionless immature voice calling him. However, perhaps it was because the voice was too cute and pleasing to the ear, Noah didn't wake up at all. Instead, he felt like he had heard a nice lullaby, and his consciousness became more immersed in the dream. Soon, he fell asleep. Master. Please wake up. There was a hint of confusion in the melodious voice that was calling Noah. It seemed that she didn't know what to do about Noah not waking up. She didn't say anything. Although Noah subconsciously felt that it was a pity that the melodious voice was gone, he was more immersed in the comfortable quilt without the voice. At this moment, a sweet breath hit Noah's face. Chirp. The next moment, Noah only felt a very soft feeling on his lips. Vaguely, Noah could even feel the touch of a small lip. That touch, for Noah, was familiar. In a daze, Noah identified the body that he was touching. His drowsy head instantly sobered up, and even his eyes opened abruptly. As soon as he opened his eyes, a beautiful scenery was imprinted in Noah's eyes. You finally woke up, Master. Her entire body was naked, her creamy white and smooth skin was directly exposed to the air. Only a pair of ivory-like slender thighs covered with pitch-black knee-high socks was riding on Noah's body. She lowered her head and stared at Noah expressionlessly. A tender and white body. Slender and long limbs. Bright and dazzling silver hair. A young and beautiful face. Who else could it be except for Aster? AI. Aster. The first thing he saw when he woke up in the morning was such an exciting scene. As a healthy man, Noah's whole body almost trembled and he almost screamed. Why? Why is it you again? Because I'm calling Master to wake up. Aster's beautiful face still didn't show the slightest emotion as she said this sentence as if it was a matter of course. The contract spirit of the person who gives snacks also seems to wake her master up in the morning, so Aster also tried. The so-called person who gives snacks in Aster's mouth was Lindsay Lay. As a young miss who was good at household chores, Linley's favorite thing to do in her free time was to develop new desserts, and then let Carol and Fenrir taste them. Occasionally, she would even take them to the academy to share, claiming that this was the consideration a noble should have. Since living in Lindsay Lay's room, Aster seemed to be often fed by Lindsay Lay. Thus, as time passed, Aster began to call Linley the person who gave out snacks. In other words, Aster saw Lindsay Lay's contract spirit Fenrir wake her master up in the morning, so she decided to follow suit. However, Fenrir actually wouldn't take the initiative to wake Lindsay Lay up in the morning. Only when Lindsay Lay specifically told Fenrir to wake her up in the morning before she went to bed, Fenrir would do it. Thinking of this, Noah turned his gaze to the bed at the side. There, Lindsay Lay's figure had already disappeared. It was probably like what Aster said, she was woken up by Fenrir. Only Carol, this incompetent maid, was still lying in bed, snoring loudly, looking very happy. Okay, I understand the reason. Noah said somewhat weakly. But even if you want to wake me up, you should at least wear some clothes, right? I think this attire can make you happy. Aster said faintly. As Master's contract spirit, pleasing you, I think it's a matter of course. He didn't know if it was Noah's misconception. Noah felt that Aster seemed to have emphasized on the words, contract spirit. Moreover, although Aster was usually expressionless, the expression on her face today seemed to be more indifferent than before, giving people a feeling that she was distant and even unreasonable. Noticing this, Noah hesitated for a moment and said with some uncertainty, "I say, Aster, are you angry?" When these words came out, Aster's mysterious eyes turned slightly and stared straight at Noah. "I am Master's contract spirit, and also Master's sword. Not long ago, we made a vow to each other, saying that we will never leave each other." "Ah." Noah laughed dryly. Indeed, I still remember, but..." Aster put a slender finger on Noah's lips, looking straight at Noah with a trace of dissatisfaction. "Master, you used a weapon other than Aster's." Hearing Aster's words, Noah finally understood why Aster was suddenly angry. Not long ago, when he was fighting against Vivian, Noah had activated the Gate of Babylon. With thousands of noble artifacts, he instantly destroyed thousands of fire wolf spirits controlled by Vivian using the blood of the Elf King sealed with the Elf King's blood. For the people of this world, even if he explained the origin of the noble artifacts to them, they probably wouldn't understand. The only thing that was certain was that none of the 1,000 noble artifacts were weaker than the elf device of this world. Aster also didn't know what a noble artifact was. Therefore, from Aster's point of view, it was as if Noah had used another elf device, which made her feel very uncomfortable. In other words, Aster was jealous. Moreover, she was jealous of Noah's weapon. "I am Master's sword, and also the strongest sword spirit." Aster stared at Noah and said seriously, "You have me who once annihilated the Infernal King. Master doesn't need those third-rate weapons." Hearing this, Noah's expression became resentful. When he was fighting against Vivian, although Noah did not use a high-grade noble artifact, it was still a noble artifact. As a legendary artifact that the hero spirits possessed when they were alive, and after the hero spirits were upgraded to the hero spirit seat, it became the trump card of the hero spirits. Even if it was the lowest grade, E-grade noble artifact, its power was much stronger than many of the skills of humans. However, in Aster's eyes, such an existence was merely a third-rate weapon. It was estimated that only the strongest sword spirit, whose strength was comparable to an A++ grade noble artifact, could say that. After all, even if Noah had all the noble artifacts that could exist in the form of weapons and tools in this world, there were only a handful of noble artifacts that could be compared to Aster's. Considering the increase in power that could be obtained when working with Aster, other than the strongest series of noble artifacts, there was really no other noble artifact that could surpass Aster's full power. However, Noah could not help but laugh at Aster's dissatisfaction. "Listen carefully, Aster." Noah extended his hand and patted Aster's head. "You're different from those weapons." "Different?" Aster was puzzled. "What's different about me? Although those weapons are powerful, to me, they're still just weapons." Noah patted Aster's head and said softly, "But Aster is different. To me, apart from being my sword, Aster is also a rare companion. You have to remember this in your heart, do you understand?" Hearing this, Aster stared blankly at Noah's gentle expression. His eyes that were filled with displeasure gradually returned to normal. "I understand, Master." "Oh." Noah was a little suspicious. "Then tell me, what do you understand?" "Those weapons that Master has are just normal weapons to you, but I'm special," Aster said. "So, from today onwards, not only will I be Master's sword, but I will also be Master's beloved sword." Seeing Aster's serious expression, Noah could only feel speechless in his heart. Since Aster woke him up, Noah did not plan to continue sleeping. After tidying up his clothes and letting Aster change, Noah held Aster's hand and walked out of the room. Humph, humph, humph. As soon as they came out of the room, a pleasant humming sound immediately entered Noah's ears. Chapter 10:20. In the kitchen, Lindley, wearing an apron, was happily humming a song while making breakfast. The sweet aroma from the kitchen filled the entire dormitory room. Smelling the aroma in the air, not to mention Noah, even Aster looked towards the kitchen. Her beautiful big eyes were blinking, and one could see some desire in them. Lindley, who was making breakfast in the kitchen, seemed to have noticed the arrival of Noah and Aster. She turned her head and looked outside the kitchen. When she saw Noah and Aster, an elegant smile appeared on her delicate face. "Good morning." "Good morning." Noah nodded. He lowered his gaze slightly and looked at the breakfast Lindley was making. "Making breakfast?" "Yes." Lindley seemed to be in a good mood. She skillfully made breakfast while happily replying to him. "Where's Carol? Hasn't she woken up yet?" "No." Noah shrugged. "That incompetent maid is still snoring away." "Don't talk about Carol like that." Lindley glared at Noah and said reproachfully. "The maids of the Lawrence Frost family only need to be cute. If that's the case, you might as well buy a doll." Noah sighed. "Do you need me to wake her up?" "There's no need." Lindley proudly raised the breakfast she was preparing. "Although Carol will continue to sleep if no one wakes her up, she will still be hungry. Once she smells the aroma, that child will wake up. Sounds like a pet from somewhere." Noah laughed dryly. "It seems that I need to re-evaluate the young miss and maid of the Lawrence Frost family. It's good that you know." Lindley didn't seem to hear the derogatory meaning in Noah's words, and her mood became happy again. "Since you're awake, I'll make breakfast for you." Noah didn't argue and directly nodded. He held Aster's hand, who was looking towards the kitchen, and sat down at the dining table. Lindley seemed to be very satisfied with the fact that someone was looking forward to the breakfast she made. Her mood also became better. Not only did she make breakfast a little faster, but her technique also became more flexible. "She really doesn't look like a spoiled young lady." Looking at Lindley, who was happily busy in the kitchen, Noah couldn't help smiling. Lindley's ability to take care of the family was truly off the charts. Even Alice, who specialized in cooking, couldn't win against Lindley in terms of culinary skills. Every time he thought of the inconceivable situation of the young girl and her servant living in this room, Noah would sigh. Lindley and Carol must have made a mistake somewhere. Otherwise, it wouldn't be that Lindley, as a young lady, could be said to be omnipotent in family matters, while Carol, as a maid, was even more useless than the spoiled young lady. Just as Noah was thinking this and paying attention to Lindley, who was busy in the kitchen, Lindley, wearing an apron, carried a small tray full of breakfast, turned around with a smile and walked out. On the tray, there were sandwich-like pieces on the surface, drizzled with honey, roasted to incomparable crispness, and emitting an appetizing aroma. The delicious-looking breakfast laid on the tray and was placed one by Lindley on the table. "Here, please." As soon as he smelled the aroma, Noah's stomach had already begun to protest. Therefore, under Lindley's beckoning, Noah reached out and picked up a sandwich, taking a small bite. The sweetness that stimulated the taste buds immediately spread in Noah's mouth. Although Noah didn't like sweet things, he didn't dislike it either. Therefore, Noah praised without any hesitation. "It's quite delicious." "Is it?" Lindley, wearing an apron, said with some happiness and some pride. "This is made with cream and honey, a specialty of the Lawrencester territory. The taste is definitely much better than ordinary sandwiches." Saying such a sentence, Lindley also brought out a tea set from the kitchen. "If you're done eating, come and taste the black tea I made myself. This is also made with the tea leaves of the Lawrencester territory." Hearing this, even Noah had a feeling that the service was too considerate, so he couldn't help but say so. "Lindley will definitely be a good bride in the future." "Ha! Lincilii was startled at first, then her pretty face blushed, and she said shyly with a mosquito voice. This is a proposal. Noah didn't hear Lincilii's whisper and could only ask in confusion. Did you say anything? No. Nothing. Lincilii shook her head in a panic, and poured out a cup of hot black tea with a red face. You can enjoy it. Oh. Although Noah was a little puzzled by Lincilii's reaction, he didn't probe further and continued to eat the delicious sandwich in his hand. At this time, Noah realized that his clothes were being pulled by a small hand. Master, Alice looked directly at Noah, her eyes that were usually full of mystery were surging with some desire. Seeing this, Noah couldn't help but smile, and tore a small piece of the sandwich in his hand and fed it to Aster. Come, Aster. Aster immediately opened his mouth obediently and bit the sandwich that Noah fed him. He puffed up his cheeks and chewed cutely. Lincilii, who saw this, let out a small cry of surprise. Noah looked at Lincilii with a puzzled face. What's wrong? No. Lincilii's gaze secretly peeked at the sandwich in Noah's hand until she was sure that the sandwich that Noah had just tore off to feed Aster was bitten by himself. Isn't this an indirect kiss? This time, Noah still couldn't hear Lincilii's muttering. At that moment, Noah scratched his cheek and said with a wry smile. What? Do you want me to feed you too? Lincilii's pretty face instantly turned red, but she coughed and pretended to be calm. If you insist on doing this, it's not like I can't consider it. Although she said this, Lincilii's eyes also showed some desire. Noah could only sigh again, and tore off a small piece of the sandwich, and fed it to Lincilii somewhat unhappily. Then open your mouth. Don't order me around. Lincilii shouted, but there wasn't a trace of displeasure on her face. Instead, she looked somewhat happy. This girl, could it be that she's the kind of person who looks like an S, but is actually AM? Just as Noah was thinking this maliciously, the door was directly pushed open. Noah, Lincilii, you still haven't gotten up. The one who appeared at the door was Claire. Hurry up and get up, today we're going to announce the new team. For the team, Claire's aggressive words became softer and softer towards the end. The reason was naturally because she saw Noah feeding Lincilii. What are you doing? The next moment, Claire's angry voice resounded in the Crow class dormitory, opening the first scene of this day's school life. Walking in the hallway of the Elven Academy, Noah, Claire, Lincilii, and Fianna walked in the direction of the announcement board. Is it a team competition? Fianna seemed to be a little nervous. This is the first time I'm participating in this kind of competition between elves. Is there anything I need to pay attention to? Fianna used to be a witch from the gods' parliament. The skills she learned were almost all ritualistic music and communication skills with elves. She didn't have any knowledge of sword dancing at all. It was natural for her to feel nervous. Don't worry, you're the most important support member in our team. Noah smiled slightly. You just need to dance the ritualistic music, leave the rest to us. You can't be more reliable when you say this, someone who can rival the strongest sword dancer. Fianna also smiled slightly. However, Fianna's smile was more or less somewhat complicated. Then, Fianna lowered her voice and said to Noah, don't worry about it. Undoubtedly, I'm just using you. Chapter 10:21. Undoubtedly, I'm just using you. When Noah heard this, his footsteps paused slightly, and then he returned to his original state as if nothing had happened. Seeing this, Fianna was surprised. You don't care what I mean. Isn't it obvious? Noah smiled indifferently. That's right, you're just using me. Fianna was a bit speechless, but she still looked at Noah and said, You already knew. Or rather, your goal was clear from the start, right? Noah looked at Claire and Linley who were quarreling and said to Fianna without turning his head. As soon as you transferred here, you asked Gray and Vaz to find me and asked to join my team without hesitation. From this point on, I believe that everyone knows that you came here specifically for me, right? So it's still too obvious. Fianna smiled helplessly, but still nodded. But you're right. The reason I came to Alicia Elven Academy was because I heard about you. About me? Noah curled his lips. It should be about me and Lotus, right? That's not wrong. Fianna sighed. In the beginning, I didn't want to transfer to Alicia Elven Academy. I only decided to come to this academy after I received the report that you had a sword dance duel with Lotus and tied with her. I also heard that you have the same sword dance technique as Lotus. Let me guess why you made this decision. Noah suddenly continued Fianna's words. If you can be on the same team as the strongest sword dancer, then you have a high chance of achieving victory in the Elven Sword Dance Festival. That's why you transferred to Alicia Elven Academy and asked me to join right from the start, right? Fianna was silent. Then, let me guess why you're willing to go to this extent to participate in the Elven Sword Dance Festival. Noah said in a flat tone. I heard from Lotus that there were some problems with your contracted spirit. If I'm not wrong, that's why you want to participate in the Elven Sword Dance Festival, right? This time, Fianna was completely speechless. Obviously, Noah had guessed correctly. Or rather, after knowing that there were problems with Fianna's contracted spirit, Noah had already guessed most of Fianna's situation. Noah felt that the reason why Fianna didn't choose to inherit Rubia Elstein's position 4 years ago and become the Fire Elf concubine must be because there was a problem with the contract with the elf. As everyone knew, the Elven concubine was at the peak of all the witches in the world and directly served the Elven king. Such an existence was like the messengers of God who spread the will of God to the world. One could imagine how high their status was. However, it was also because of this that the Elven concubine could only be the most outstanding of all the witches. If an Elven concubine who stood at the peak of all the witches had problems with her contracted spirit, it could only prove that her ability wasn't enough to become the Elven concubine. It could even cause the Elven king to dislike her and cause unnecessary trouble. Because of this, Fianna gave up the position of the Elven concubine. Others thought that Fianna had abandoned herself and failed to live up to the expectations of the Ordesian Empire's people, so she voluntarily gave up the position of the Elven concubine. Who knew that Fianna didn't voluntarily give up the position of the Elven concubine, but had no choice but to give up the position that was at the peak of all the witches? Perhaps the Ordesian Empire's royal family found out about Fianna's problem, so they banned her and made her disappear from everyone's sight, making her become the lost Elven concubine. Noah could also imagine how Fianna was looked down upon and neglected by the Ordesian Empire's royal family after losing the possibility of becoming the Elven concubine. However, Fianna didn't choose to sit still. Her Highness' plan was to participate in the Elven Sword Dance Festival and obtain victory in the Elven Sword Dance Festival to solve the problem of contracting spirits. This was the reason why Fianna didn't hesitate to give up her status as a princess and come to Alicia Elven Academy as an Elven envoy. However, there is one thing that I don't understand. Noah suddenly changed the topic. Because of Lotus, the problem of your contracted spirit has been solved. Why do you still want to stay here? Do you think that I can return to the House of Gods and compete for the position of the Elven concubine after taking back the power of the contracted spirit? Fianna bitterly smiled. You think too much of the Gods' Parliament. It's a place that has gradually decayed over time. In the past, the Gods' Parliament only wanted to nurture the most outstanding Elven concubines for the Elven king, but now, the Gods' Parliament has been bound by many worldly things. A place like that wouldn't allow a stain to appear on its reputation. Fianna sarcastically said. For example, a person who once gave up the position of the elven concubine and became a lost elven concubine can still stay there. Even so, you have no reason to stay in my team, right? Noah glanced at Fianna. Even if you can't return to the House of Gods, you are still the excellent witch concubine who almost became the elven concubine. If the royal family of Alicia Empire knows that the problem of your contracted spirit has been solved, then you can take back everything you have as a princess, right? But I don't want to do that. Fianna said without any hesitation. When I lost my status and power, those guys looked at me with contempt and mockery. Now that I have recovered, I am showing off in front of those guys. It feels like I am performing like a clown. I hate that feeling. Besides, it's not like I don't have any reason to stay. Fianna looked at Noah with a sweet smile. Her gloomy tone was swept away. In the elf forest, in order to solve the problem of contracting elves, Lotus and I had a lot of contact. I can feel that the strongest sword dancer seems to pay special attention to you. I want to know what is the relationship between you two. Hearing this, Noah was startled and said with uncertainty. Don't tell me you want to stay in my team because of this. Not only that. Fianna smiled mischievously. I just feel that since I have no place to go, I might as well follow you temporarily and go to the same stage as the strongest sword dancer. That's not bad. After saying this, Fianna put her hands behind her back and swung her waist-length hair. She hummed and walked forward as if her mood had suddenly improved. Seeing Fianna gradually catch up with Claire and Linley, Noah smiled helplessly. This girl definitely has the potential to become a witch. While talking, the group arrived at the announcement board. Found it. The sharp-eyed Claire immediately found an announcement. Tomorrow's team competition, Fairy's Tale vs. Winged Dragon Team. Winged Dragon Team. Noah turned his gaze back to the ranking board and found the Winged Dragon Team's ranking. Isn't that the team that replaced Versilia after she left and became the #1 team on the leaderboard? That's right. Linley frowned. The 5 members are all the most outstanding students in the senior grade. They are a rare strong opponent. That's right. Fianna spread her hands. But we will win, right? Claire and Linley looked at each other, smiled, and said in unison. That's for sure. Seeing this scene, Noah couldn't help but smile. At this moment, the students on the side began to whisper. I didn't expect that not only would Lady Versilia's #1 position be replaced, but even the 3rd place Wind King Knight Regiment's team might be replaced. That can't be helped. Because Lady Versilia attacked the Wind King Knight Regiment before, many of the knights were injured, including the Knight Regiment's teammates. Since their teammates are injured, they can only give up the competition and give up the ranking. What a pity. Noah, Claire, Linley, and Fianna looked at each other. You're tuning into the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.